Good afternoon, members. Wonderful to see you here at the third meeting of the IOC. We have a meeting, and of course, we are going to hear the actual plans from the agency, so this is going to be fun, at least for somebody here. So I want to, if we can, do the Pledge of Allegiance, and if we can stand, I'll ask Judge Menendez to lead us in the pledge if you can.
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We're at the public comment portion of the agenda, so if there's anyone from the public who would like to comment, please come to the podium and you will get your 3 minutes if you would just state your name and where you are from. If not, then we will move on. Last call, anybody from the public would like to comment? Okay. Let's move on to the members' interests portion of the agenda. Is there any member of the commission that would like to kind of speak about anything that's on your mind? We're going to talk, Johnny's going to talk about a minutes issue here in a minute, but any members' interests that we want to talk about before we get into the meat of it?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Senator.
I expressed an interest last meeting about the costs to the taxpayers of the lawsuit, and I might be ahead of myself, but I don't recall seeing it in the minutes.
It's not in the minutes. If you will look in your documents, they handed out a Tampa Bay Times article that sets forth the answer to your question, which is $158,000 so far. And this article was of the 21st of 2019, and we know that number's going to go up because of the procedural nature of where the case is. So as of now, $158,000 cost to the taxpayers.
As of
Dated
March.
this article.
As of March, that's right. The article was published in March, so it's probably higher than that. Thank you.
Well, follow up, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I'm ahead of the minutes, but I want to know why wasn't it in the minutes?
Staff, do you have an answer as to?
We just wanted to provide that info to you at the meeting, and I wanted to clarify that we, as staff to the IOC, we being the MPO, the clerk, and the attorney's office haven't independently verified those figures. So we just wanted to point you in the direction of where we got that information, and also to let you know that if you want that information, you're welcome to submit a public records request to the county as a citizen.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator.
Notwithstanding that explanation, it was something that occurred at the meeting, and my question is, why wasn't it included in the minutes? Because I didn't get an answer to that. I got an explanation as to why we haven't been told, but I just think that all transactions that occur here, I mean, there are certain limitations to what goes in minutes. I'm fully aware of that, but since concerns of others were expressed in the minutes, then I feel that someone was derelict in not putting in my concern.
Just your question.
Let me say that moving forward, at least, we're going to work to do better on that. But I'm also going to say that I'm going to work with staff to get an answer to your question specifically, and we will endeavor to get that by the next meeting in terms of what the actual number is. However, we have to do that. Is that responsive?
Yes, I'll speak when we get to the minutes.
Okay. Thank you. Judge.
Can I say something about the minutes?
Sure.
Okay, since the senator did.
Which minutes are you talking about?
The August ones,
Okay.
the ones that were corrected.
Yes.
And it may be a matter of semantics, but I didn't think they were corrected in the sense that I thought they needed to be corrected. Again, referring back to our first meeting, Mr. Hunter, I think, nominated Mr. Fletcher, and I seconded that nomination. Then Mr. Fernandez nominated the chair, Mr. Shaw, and I think Senator Joyner seconded that nomination. And then we voted, and Mr. Shaw won by a vote of 8-5. These minutes reflect that some people voted no for either Mr. Fletcher or either against Mr. Fletcher or against Mr. Shaw. I don't know about the rest of you folks, but I never voted no against anybody. I merely
Voted for.
voted for Mr. Fletcher. I had seconded his nomination before anything had happened, then it was up there, so I voted for him. And this says I voted no against Mr. Shaw, which is, I don't want Mr. Shaw to think that I ever voted
I'm not going to hold it against you, Judge, but
Anything.
what I will say is I had that exact same question when I looked at the minutes prior to this meeting.
Right, and
And
I
I
thought we had
asked,
corrected it last time.
I'm going to tell you the explanation I was given as to why
Okay.
it was
Yeah, thank
like it
you.
is.
Thank you for that question, Judge. We did reach out to the clerk about making the corrections to the minutes, and specifically regarding the voting procedure, and they told us that when there are two or more candidates that are being voted on for officer, to use as an example, they told me that when a vote is not cast for a candidate, they infer that as a no. So that's basically their standard operating procedure or policy, if you will.
I always inferred that you could only vote for one candidate, so I think it's not an appropriate inference. I think it should merely be reflected that a vote was taken. Mr. Shaw got the majority, 8-5, and he's the chair. And then Mr. Fletcher was nominated and seconded as the vice chair, and the vote was 13-0 on that. I think that's the way I would write it semantically, because I just don't want history to reflect that I, in any type of public meeting, voted no against Mr. Shaw, because I didn't.
I would be open to a motion to reflect that, and we can be where we need to be on that, if you would like to do that.
Yes, I move that the minutes of the August meeting be corrected to reflect that the election occurred, there was election for the chair, and X person got X votes and Y got the other, and Mr. Shaw was elected the chair. Because, period, that's my motion. And then my statement afterwards is notwithstanding what the clerk said. I personally feel like this is our meeting and that Robert's Rules of Order is what we should look to. And like the judge, I checked it out and it's not correct. And so I think that we are the sole arbiters of what occurred at our meeting and what we want included in the minutes.
And
Yes, sir.
although I was appointed as the clerk's appointee, historically, the clerk and I have disagreed on many of things. And fortunately, I guess for me, and unfortunately for the clerk, I generally prevailed, in my opinion.
I bet you did.
But, so if I could prevail again tonight, I'd be very happy.
Senator Joyner's comments are well taken. Do we have a second to her motion?
Second.
All right. Any objections to Senator Joyner's motion to have the minutes reflect what occurred at the meeting of the August 27th minutes? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Has everybody read the September 23rd minutes? And are those, yes, Judge?
I read them.
Are those minutes okay with everybody, or do we have any corrections to those minutes? If not, then I'll,
Chair, I'd like an addition to the minutes.
yes.
To reflect that I asked the question at the meeting as to what was the cost of the taxpayers for the lawsuit.
Let me ask that. Is that not in the minutes anywhere?
I can't recall if I came across that or not.
Okay, that ought to be in there. We'll correct that. Any other additions, corrections? If not, I'll entertain a motion for the correct. Yes.
On the previous motion?
Yes, it was unanimous. Yes. Do we have a motion to correct the minutes per Senator Joyner's recommendation?
So moved.
Second, anybody? Okay, with that, do we have any objections to the adoption of the corrected September 23rd minutes? No objections, so show those minutes adopted as they are, will be corrected to reflect Senator Joyner's question. Any other members' interests? Just want to make sure we didn't skip over that. Okay, we've approved.
Who seconded that? Was that Judge or Chip Fletcher?
I did.
Fletcher.
Vice Chair Fletcher.
All right, let us move to section 7. Although it says action item, it is not an action item. I don't think we need to take any action on it, but it is the calendar that we amended, 2019, 2020 calendar. If you'll go through those dates just so we have them, so the committee is aware, and then we can move on.
Thanks. At the last meeting, we presented you with draft dates for future meetings in 2019 and extending through to 2020. So based on our conversation, we finalized, or the committee concurred, that it wants to meet tonight, October 21st from 5 to 9 p.m., November 21st from 5 to 9 p.m., December 9th from 5 to 9 p.m. if necessary, January 2020 on the 27th from 6 to 8 p.m., April 27th, we hadn't set a time, but that meeting will be the town hall at which you'll hear project proposals from citizens and do the public hearing to review the annual Surtax audit and annual report. Then again, August 24th from 6 to 8 p.m. and October 26th from 6 to 8 p.m., 2020 that is.
Thank you. Any questions about that? All right. Let's move to section 6, status reports. This is A, overview of the Surtax annual auditing process, what to expect. Mr. Gajar, I hope I said that right, Clerk of Court and Comptroller. Did I say the name?
Yes.
All
thank
right.
you.
Floor is yours.
Okay. All right. Good evening. My name is Ajay Gajar, Finance Director.
Can I ask you to speak up, or if somebody can
Yes.
turn the volume up?
All right. So this is about the transportation surtax audit requirements. Pursuant to Section 11.04 of the Charter Amendment, the Clerk of Circuit Court and Comptroller hires the auditor. And the audit must be completed within 6 months, and that would make it March 30th, 2020. The report that the auditors do would cover all the entities covered, and they would be the Clerk of Circuit Court, the Hillsborough County Board of County Commissioners, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, HART, and the cities of Tampa, Plant City, and Temple Terrace. These are all the entities covered by the auditor's report. The audit scope this year will be simplified because it turns out that no proceeds were spent. There were no expenditures, so the audit of the expenditures would be very simplified. The auditors would just simply verify that there were no expenditures. They will need to audit the distribution of money by the Clerk of Circuit Court and to ensure that the money was distributed in a timely manner. They'll also need to verify that the money allocated to the different governments were properly calculated. So far, the clerk has distributed $143.8 million of transportation surtax proceeds, and they've been distributed as shown on the chart. Of course, next year, the amount would be greater because there's more months covered. The tentative timetable for the audit, December 15th, the clerk will select the auditor. January 1st, we plan to have the auditor start the audit. February 28th, the auditor would give draft report out. And March 30th, the clerk would send this report to the Independent Oversight Committee. The audit would be completed by then. And then we have a plan for the auditor to present to the Independent Oversight Committee in, I believe, April.
Judge.
Yes.
Why don't you, because I want everybody to get through their presentations, including the agencies, and then we'll ask questions at the end. So I got you. You're first on deck.
No, doesn't matter which order I'm in. I just have one.
Okay. All right. Actually, that's my presentation.
All right.
I could,
Go ahead, Judge.
Perfect timing.
You're as impressive.
You had, if you can go back a slide or two, it shows the distribution amounts.
Yes.
That's it, yeah. I thought earlier you had said that the audit this year is going to be very simple because they're maybe I misunderstood. Maybe, was it no money was spent or no money was distributed?
All the money was distributed, but the entities haven't spent any of the money.
Okay, all right. And so that's just the amount that was distributed under the formula?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
I have a follow-up to that myself. This slide was interesting to me. So essentially, is that money sitting in the bank account of those various agencies waiting to be spent?
Yes, yes.
Date of the funds disbursement, and then prior to the sales tax being implemented and those funds being dispersed, was interest accrued on that money, and was that part of the disbursement?
Yes. Whatever interest the clerk earned on the money was distributed to all the entities in proportion to how the money was distributed. And it was very little because it was quickly distributed. These entities will be earning their own interest on this money from the money they have.
Any other questions, members, to the clerk? All right, thank you. Appreciate it. All right, let's move on to B, which is the actual surtax plans for 2020. I think we're first going to hear from our wonderful county attorney about the memo that was included in the agenda. We appreciate that. Then we'll hear from the city of Tampa. But you've got the floor there, Mr. Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, committee members. I just want to very briefly go over this outline, and then if you have any questions. What I attempted to do was just provide a roadmap, just an outline of the process, what your function is. And it's essentially to determine whether the projects in a particular agency's plan comply with the law. In this case, what is the law? It's really three things. The relevant statute, which I provided a copy of, the charter amendment as modified by the trial court, and the county ordinance that was recently enacted. All of those documents I've provided for ease of reference, background reading if you desire to do so. The next step is really to look at which particular government you're dealing with. Depending upon the agency, there are really three different sets of rules. Two fall under the general purpose category. One falls under the transit portion. Of course, the transit, which is I think on page 2, is HART. The general purpose portion would be the three cities and the county. The difference there being there is what's referred to as a small agency portion, which would be the cities of Plant City and Temple Terrace, because it's estimated that they will receive less than 5% of the overall surtax proceeds. I won't go over each one of these in detail unless you'd like me to do so, but certainly I can answer any questions. Key point is the small agency distribution. That's really just a review of compliance with the statute, because Plant City and Temple Terrace, because of the limited distribution, the charter amendment and the ordinance both provide they are not subject to the individualized expenditure allocations as the county is and the city of Tampa is. HART also has its own set of expenditure categories. They're different, but they're also subject to something that's similar. Aside from that, there are various definitions. Essentially, this all refers back to the relevant statute, which I provided a copy of, the charter amendment itself. I did also provide the backup. There was a request for the trial court opinions. Those are in the package as well if you have any questions. And then lastly, in terms of some of the issues and some of the comments that have come up previously, what I attempted to address was what the purpose of this committee is, the certification process. Some of the comments that were made, for instance, what about prioritization of projects, for example? Another one would be there were comments, questions about the supplanting of funds, as was done years ago with the Florida lottery situation. Certainly as board members, committee members, there are appropriate venues to deal with those issues. The venue would, in that respect, is largely, be it if it's the city of Tampa, would be the city council, the Plant Cities Commission, Temple Terraces Commission, the County Commission, or the Hart Board. The certification process as outlined in the charter is pretty specific, which I sort of outlined. Other than that, happy to answer any questions. Sam Hamilton, County Attorney's Office.
I'm just going to ask you, because everyone hasn't printed this out, and I know it's in the electronic portion, but if you will read the conclusions of your memorandum, particularly page 3 that I'm looking at, if you'll just kind of state those generally for ease.
Right.
Thanks.
What the chair is referring to is, in your analysis of the projects in each particular agency's plan, if after reviewing those projects in a particular plan, you find that they comply with the relevant law, which, as I mentioned earlier, is the statute, the charter amendment as revised by the court, and the county ordinance recently enacted. If you find that those projects comply with those relevant, what I refer to as the governing law, then the appropriate action would be to certify the plan. If you find otherwise, if there are particular projects that do not comply for whatever particular reason there may be, then it would be appropriate to make a finding that they do not, that you do not certify those particular projects. You could have a circumstance, each agency has multiple projects in its plan. You could find some of the projects in compliance, some not to be in compliance. So it could be a combination. That's essentially it.
Any questions, counsel? Yes, Judge. And
You
then,
mentioned his memo. Was that part of the minutes that were emailed?
yes,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Thought I copied everything.
It was, it was the 100 pages because it had all the attachments.
no, 'cause that's
That's
the
why
one
we
I-
didn't print it out.
that's
So
the one I
everyone's
chose
looking.
not to.
We didn't print out counsel was very good at
Yeah.
addressing everything, but it was 100 pages.
Yeah,
Mr.
that's the one I
Chairman.
didn't print. Yeah, okay.
You talked about Hart. Basically, what you're saying is they don't follow the so-called buckets and percentages like the jurisdictions do, the larger jurisdictions.
HART has its own, it actually has 2 expenditure categories. They're just not the same as the expenditure categories for the city of Tampa, Hillsborough County.
So their categories are in the ordinance also, or that's just their own categories?
They're both in the ordinance and the charter amendment.
And
And I
it would-
referenced them at the bottom of page 2, the top of page 3 of the outline.
Okay, and then the small cities don't have the categories to deal with.
That's correct. You essentially fall back to the relevant statute.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, let us move on to the very first Surtax project plan that we are going to hear from, and it's the City of Tampa. So we welcome you here. I think you have a video to play for us, and then if you will introduce yourselves and then share your plan with us. Thank you. And let's, just for ease, if you have any questions, just hold them until everyone's done with their presentations, and then we will ask all the questions that you have. Thanks.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here with this esteemed group of folks on our Independent Oversight Committee. We thank you for all your volunteer time to be a part of this group and get us through this process of reviewing our certified plans and hopefully to the next step of actually getting those funds to spend on all these great projects that we all have to talk about this evening. I'm Jean Duncan. I'm with the City of Tampa. Apologize if I'm wandering from the mic. Please just let me know. I tend to like to walk around. So with the City of Tampa, I'm the Transportation and Stormwater Services Director. And I'd like to share our certified plan with you this evening. I'm not going to go over every single project, but I am going to give you some background, a little bit about our philosophy, our prioritization, and then some specific examples of our projects that we have for all the categories. And then hopefully a simplistic information on how we're taking the buckets that we are requiring to be used and applying those to our set of projects. So I'll get started here. My tech squad is helping me.
Here I would definitely like to see Tampa either, improve the trolley, improve the bus, just anything where even I can get around. And I knew we're in Tampa being in a chair, so some accessible options would definitely be nice. And definitely just having more options in general because we're really limited to so little.
Safety for students, like at bus stops, walking to bus stops. If we had an opportunity to have rail, expansion of the trolley.
More commuter options for people that maybe live in the suburbs coming into the city. Those roads get so backed up. I have some coworkers that drive not even that far, but the traffic is so intense, it takes them over an hour, sometimes hour and a half just to go a few miles.
So a lot of that probably looked familiar to many of you, having lived in the Tampa and Hillsborough County area for a while. Lots of familiar comments from our residents out there, and we're so pleased that they were interested enough in our transportation woes to support this tax last November. So I'm happy to share with you information about our plan, as I mentioned. I wanted to just say a little bit about our guiding principles and the framework of which we develop our capital programs. The City of Tampa and the other agencies, we've been using the same protocol for many years in terms of developing what we call a 5-year CIP, Capital Improvement Program. And so none of that has changed. The big difference that we have this year is just that we have potentially a lot more money to apply to those prioritization lists of projects, and we're looking forward again to that happening soon. I'll give you some examples, as I mentioned, about the projects that we have in front of you. The full plan has been provided for your review, but I just didn't think it was worth your time to go through every single project. Obviously, there are some follow-up meetings, and we can take a deeper dive into whatever level of detail you'd like. But for tonight, just an overview to kind of give you a sense of our projects. And then the certification statement, just a reminder, all of us have certified our plans, all the agencies, so we feel very confident that you'll have the same findings, and we look forward to having you review the information and coming to the same conclusion yourselves. And then I believe we'll decide on how the questions should be handled. We're happy to accommodate those in whatever manner you think would work best for this meeting tonight. Just a little bit about our guiding principles. First of all, Vision Zero. If any of you have heard of Vision Zero, you might be a little familiar with it. But basically, Vision Zero was something that started over in Sweden in the 1990s. And it's basically a vision to have 0 fatalities out in our rights-of-way. And it's a strategy for doing that by applying safe and equitable and helpful, healthy, and multimodal options to folks, and using our engineering of our roads, the enforcement of those roads, and also education of folks trying to get over things like distracted driving and other behaviors that are not good for people navigating in the rights-of-way. Another guiding principle is to make sure walking and biking is comfortable. You've probably heard that walk, live, play phrase many times. Developments are now more sensitive to that, and we're trying to have the roadways reflected in that same philosophy where wherever you're living or working, that you have a comfortable space to move about and not necessarily taking a car for every trip that you make. We also want to make sure that what were formerly recreational trails are more integrated into our transportation network, and we leverage our funds to maximize the use of those trails into real multimodal options for folks, and not just for bike riding on a Sunday. We also want to make sure that our land use and our transit planning is more closely aligned. It's something we've all been working on for many years, and I know some of you here are very familiar with that topic, but we're going to take even more efforts to bring those things more in line with each other so that the land use and transportation and transit planning are all being done in a very cohesive manner. Additionally, safety, equity, health, sustainability, and resiliency, these are kind of new buzzwords now, but they're not buzzwords to us. They're real things, and they're reflected in our projects through a realistic approach. And we take those very seriously in terms of how we decide on how we prioritize our projects, where we do our projects, what type of projects we do. We're very sensitive to having a plan that addresses our vulnerable communities, and that's equitable for all, and that's safe for everyone. And something that the city, and I know Hillsborough County, as a member, both members of our Smart City Alliance, are very interested in, and again, I shouldn't leave out the other agencies, we're all interested in having, at least in the city of Tampa, what we call a city as a lab approach. And that means we want to test out new ideas. We want to do pilot projects, because if we don't try out things and see how they work, then we may never know that we have a really good idea. A recent example is our e-scooter program in the city of Tampa. We get a lot of criticism for it. We do get some positives. But if we don't try these things out, we won't know whether that is a really good, true mode options that we can make available to our citizens and our residents. So we're willing to push the envelope in a very safe manner and try new things for the benefit of our system and for the benefit of creating a real creative transportation network for everyone. Again, back to the background and framework, all of our agencies work using the comprehensive plan and the long-range plan that our MPO puts together. I feel like we have a very good working relationship, multi-agency working relationship, where that plan is the framework and the spine of our network that all the agencies work towards in developing our layers of projects that feed onto that network so that we have a cohesive system throughout the whole county. So that's sort of what we keep our eye on in terms of those big state roads and those interstates. Our smaller projects need to feed into that and reflect the corridors that are on there so that we have a sensible system when we all invest our resources. We have a strategic plan in the city of Tampa. We call it our mobility plan. We try to update about every 5 years. It's a little lagging right now because of the fact that we're getting this additional money. And our plan is to take some of these funds and do a major overhaul of that plan to reflect all the additional funding that we're planning to get and to expand the types of projects that we have, which are currently not reflected in that plan. Some of the components of that that mobility plan include our walk-bike plans. And I still remember walking down the sidewalk and running into Ray Shermonsi. I was looking for funding about 10 years ago to fund our very first walk-bike plan. And Ray was so generous to offer for the MPO to help out with that effort. And since that time, we've had a great working relationship with the MPO to progress that plan. We've done it in phases because typical with transportation projects, we can never do everything at once. We have to make incremental progress. So we take bites at the apple. So just like everything else with our walk-bike plan, we did it in different phases, covering different portions of the city, till we finally got everything completed, and now it's time to take that to the next level of adding more details in, adding more greenway and trail planning into that, adding more ADA upgrades into it, and so we're real excited to possibly have the opportunity to do more of that with our mobility plan upgrade that we're planning to do. So as we go through that upgrade and we go through all of these projects, one of the things that the city of Tampa is very interested in is having more robust public engagement. And we want to do that more proactively. We want to do that before we get to about a 60% plan stage and then go out and tell people, well, it's really too late for those kind of comments. This is too far down the line. Wish we would have known that sooner. We want to start that engagement soon, and we want to make sure it's meaningful and people feel like they have a say in what we were planning to do, because our whole purpose is to serve the public and develop the projects which we feel that our citizens are really demanding and really needing. And in terms of how we prioritize our projects, this is very similar for the county and the other agencies. We've had the same or very similar protocol for many years. And so it's very interesting how the All for Transportation folks decided to identified the buckets in the referendum because it lines up exactly with the way we prioritize our projects. And that is to look at the maintenance needs of the system, the safety needs of the system, what are congestion and bottleneck issues that we have, and then again, the walk-bite aspect of our system. We have to tackle our system upgrades with a lot of tools in the toolbox and not just a one-size-fits-all type of project. So we look at it from those different angles. And again, that lines up very well with the buckets that we have to work with, and so we feel like that's made it an easy process for us to go through certifying our plan. Another thing that we're always doing, even if this money comes along, and I should say when this money comes along, is we will continue to do the same thing we've always done in transportation, which is seek funding as much as possible from other sources. We're not going to give up on that. Right now, we currently have a gas tax, which in the city of Tampa has been steady for many, many years at about $10 million a year, which is very, very little money for the needs that we have. We have impact fees, which haven't been increased for over 30 years. So that money is just a handful of millions of dollars that is woefully inadequate for our needs. So even though we'll be very excited to get the All for Transportation monies, we're still going to pursue other grant monies. And it's sort of a little acronym in our department, #OPM, which is other people's money. So my staff knows we're always trying to find other people's money to spend on our projects. So we'll continue to do that as much as possible. So this graphic is just meant to kind of give you a sense of all the types of things that our system out there needs to improve. And again, tools in the toolbox. We have a variety of things that we need to do to our system, from upgrading the advanced traffic management system, which is all the things in the ground that you don't see that make the traffic signals work properly, to things that you do see like sidewalks and street lights and flashing beacons for pedestrians, to other things such as improving intersections and widening them a little bit to make them more capacity friendly. So there's a lot of things we have to do to tackle the system, to maintain it, to make it safer, to address the walk-bike needs, and to address the congestion that I just mentioned a little while ago. And I'll go through and give you some examples of the projects that we'll be doing to tackle the system on its many edges that we have to try to improve it. So a little bit about the types of projects we have. Besides those kind of groupings of needs that we have that I just mentioned, we kind of boil down most of our projects into these 7 main categories. We have what we call complete streets. That may be an unfamiliar term to some of you, very familiar to many of us. What that basically means is we've had a very car-centric system that's been designed over decades of time that was never very friendly towards other users besides the vehicle. And so those roadways often have very wide travel lanes, lacking in sidewalks, minimal crosswalk amenities. And so a complete street is, you get kind of a different definition depending on who you ask. And there's a variety of, there's shades of complete streets. There's the Honda all the way to the Cadillac. But basically the approach is to take an existing roadway and repurpose it to the best possible use, given the funding you have, to address the pedestrian, bicycle, mode share, such as transit, or micromobility, such as bike share. Try to fit all of those things in, including parking in some cases, into your new roadway as much as possible, because typically the road that you're looking to improve doesn't have a lot of those elements, and it should. So we're basically trying to bring our roads up to a better level of usefulness so we can maximize the use of that right-of-way for all the folks that want to use that space. So we've got our what we call our complete street and safety corridor projects. We've got those typical congestion and intersection projects you see all the time where we're adding in a turn lane or lengthening a turn lane or a through lane to get more throughput into the intersection. We have neighborhood and area-wide improvements, such as doing some traffic calming in neighborhoods. Often we'll resurface a neighborhood and add in some traffic calming to try to address those cut-through speeding issues that neighborhoods are experiencing. We have what we call the walk-bike improvements, which may not be doing anything to the travel lanes, but we're addressing crosswalk needs, ADA needs, which when I say ADA, I apologize if I'm using too many acronyms sometimes. It's Americans with Disability Act, passed in the 1980s, which we're required to follow anytime we do a transportation project. We've got to incorporate those requirements and upgrade those standards per that law. Again, bridges and seawalls, you can imagine we've got 5 water bridges in the city of Tampa that are all about 100 years old each. So lots of maintenance needs out there. We have transit projects. I'll mention when I get to the slide, our streetcar project is our signature transit project for the city of Tampa. And then we have programs that we do where we don't have one big project that goes from point A to point B, but we have a lot of things within that program that we do, such as streetlights, sidewalks, pedestrian beacons, things that we sprinkle around in different locations, but not necessarily improving one corridor at a time. So we've taken that list of projects types that we have, and we've taken those 4 bucket categories. There's actually a 5th bucket, which is called the flexible funds, but that bucket is basically any money that's left over from the minimums that have to be spent, and those can be applied to any of the other project categories. In our case, we've used all the monies up in each of the 4 buckets, and this year, for this particular year, 2020, we don't have any additional flexible funds left over for spending. I do believe the county may have in their case. So that's just a choice that we have under the referendum that we can make. So we've taken those 4 buckets of money, applied them to the projects, and when you go through your actual project plans, which I'm sure you'll go through that in more detail between now and the next meeting, you'll see exactly for each project that each project has applied those requirements on every single project using those bucket categories. So I'll just kind of start out, if you look on the left side of my presentation there, I'm going to kind of go through what I just mentioned, all of our project types. I'm going to start out with the programs, and I'll just give some examples of each of those project types that I mentioned and not list every single one that we're doing, just to give you a sense of some of the projects we're doing in the city of Tampa. Again, your project plan lists all of this in exact detail with all the money shown as well. So starting out with that program category I mentioned, where we're doing lumps of things like streetlights, sidewalks. Included in that category is what we're going to do, as I mentioned earlier, which is upgrading, overhauling our citywide mobility plan. That's our little city blueprint, which is a subset of the comp plan and the long-range transportation plan of what we're going to be planning to do over the next 5 to 30 years. And so we're going to update that plan, and as part of that plan, like I said, we're going to have a lot of community outreach that's going to go along with it. That's going to frame our vision and put a framework for the types of projects that we're going to do going forward. And it's going to guide us to making future project prioritization decisions as we go through each capital program planning for each budget year. We're also going to put some money on what we're calling program management. Right now, most of my transportation engineering staff is here. There's about 5 of us. A few more back at the office. So if we're going to quadruple our budget, suddenly we're going to have a lot of folks helping to make that happen. And so we're going to have a program management support that's going to help us make sure we've got support, have consultants as an extension of our staff to prepare and execute these projects as we're required to do under the referendum. That's going to be very helpful. A little bit more about our programs. As I mentioned, these are some examples of the programs. We'll be putting monies on each of these programs, and then within each program, we'll have a whole set of locations where we'll be going to spend the funds. I'm really pleased about our streetlight program because it's now a smart streetlight program. We've been working very closely with TICA over the last couple of years, and what that means is we're going to be putting sensors into our streetlights that are going to be able to give us data on a number of different areas, such as flood detection, gunshot detection, traffic management data, and we can take that information from those sensors. We want to create a sensor-rich environment, collect that data, and we can start using that data to do more proactive things with our transportation planning, with the management of our signal system as well. It's going to be very helpful, and again, helpful with flooding, helpful with public safety. So we're looking forward to having more of these go out throughout the whole city and give us more information so we can do a better job with the resources we have. Smart mobility is another area where we have an actual smart mobility division in the city of Tampa. What that is really taking technology and letting technology and innovation be applied into our transportation projects. A couple things I'll just mention that we have working on that'll be coming out soon. We're doing a project to have a solar-powered traffic signal. When we had Irma come through here a few years ago, we had about a third of our traffic signals went out for long periods of time, as well as the TECO streetlight system went out. So when you have a dark intersection, just imagine two major roadways connecting at an intersection, you have no streetlights and you have no traffic signal. It's a very dangerous condition to have. And so even though we have police force and signs we put out, it's not enough to cover the need, and it's a very primitive way to try to put that safety back. So as a resiliency effort, we want to have ways to bring our system back up quickly. So that's an example. We also have a smart paint project we're working on where we'll have sensors in the paint of crosswalks. And when you have a visually impaired person with a cane, a special cane with earbuds and a smartphone, that smart paint, those sensors will talk to that individual and help guide them across the intersection. So smart mobility, we're going to try to keep being creative with the money we have and doing things that are going to be helpful to our transportation system beyond just the usual meat and potatoes type of projects we've been doing historically. A few other things up there, roadway signage, pavement markings, I'm sure you're familiar with those. Vision Zero programs, as I said, Vision Zero is going to be heard a lot more from the city of Tampa and from the county and others. We want to have zero fatalities on our roadways. That seems like a completely impossible goal. But if you don't set your sights high, you're never going to get there. And so that is our goal. We're going to do that through roadway improvements, through education, enforcement, and working together with the other agencies and the MPO. They've been a strong proponent of this early on, probably the earliest ones to really raise the flag for it. And so we're all finally coming around and saying, yes, we all need to do this. So we're looking forward to working with the MPO and others to do some of these programs. And again, sidewalks. Any of you who hear about transportation, there's always a lack of sidewalks out there. We really want to focus on our schools. As the school board makes different decisions about busing, we've got to make sure that those children have a safe way to walk from their home to their school. And so we're going to be putting a lot more money as we get the funds onto and making sure we have sidewalks, particularly around our schools. So again, I'll just buzz through some of these different categories here of the types of projects we're doing. I won't bore you with every single one. So our next category, as I mentioned, we have what we call corridor projects. This is where we have a roadway from point A to point B, often maybe a mile long. We're doing a lot of stuff on that roadway. Traffic signals, resurfacing, sometimes drainage. It's more of a comprehensive type project. And so I've just listed a few up there that you might be familiar with. Some in North Tampa, 109th Nebraska Avenue to 30th Street. Columbus Drive, you've probably driven down that road many times, Nebraska to 14th. El Prado from West Shore to Bay Shore. So we're very thoughtful about where we do these projects and making sure that we distribute the projects. As you can imagine with our council members, they're also very sensitive to wanting to make sure there's projects everywhere throughout the city in all those council districts. So that's something that's always on our radar. Another category we have is congestion relief and intersection improvements. So I've just listed a few of those as examples. Interbay Boulevard, that's a very important truck route in the southern portion of the peninsula, serving MacDill Air Force Base and others. So we're looking to do a congestion relief project there. As you can see in the picture on the bottom, we've got lots of traffic signals all over. We've got over 550 signalized intersections just in the city of Tampa. But we're also going to be looking at doing more roundabouts. And some people really don't like roundabouts because they're not familiar with them. But it's a national trend to start putting more roundabouts in our transportation system. It's a Florida trend, and now it's also a Department of Transportation trend to look for opportunities for roundabouts. So you'll see more of those everywhere you go, and I encourage everyone to be comfortable with them because they're really the safest thing you can do. They're resilient. The light doesn't go out when there's a storm. The roundabout keeps working after a storm. You can't run a roundabout like you can a stop sign or a signal. So we're hoping that we see more of those to make everyone safer when they're driving throughout our community. Neighborhood improvements, here's a few that I've just listed for us here in the city of Tampa. Those are often either the sidewalk or resurfacing type projects. And we're going to be looking to incorporate a little more traffic calming as we do these projects. We want to go out into neighborhoods as infrequently as possible because people get very frustrated saying, you were just out here and you fixed this, and now you're back tearing up the road again. We do have utility breaks that happen, which are not anything we can avoid. But as much as we can plan and go out and get something done and do it completely and not have to go back, that's our goal. It saves money and it also saves frustration with folks not having to tolerate construction in their neighborhood. Walk-bike projects, we've got a number of those throughout the city. Two of our really interesting ones are the Green Artery, which some of you may have heard about. This is a series of connections that's going to connect about 20 neighborhoods throughout the city, sort of central Tampa down to maybe about Kennedy Boulevard to the furthest of the south. And this was a neighborhood initiative that started a number of years ago. Lena Young Green was really on the front lines of this, and it's just grown and grown and grown. And we've got the MPO involved a few years ago, and now here we are ready to start the beginnings of this project if we can get this money and get it started. Another project we're doing in the city of Tampa is currently called the Green Spine. It's basically building a cycle track all the way from Howard Avenue up to Cascaden Park. We want to start having more physically separated bike lanes for our bicyclists. We have all those stripes on the road, which is a good step in the right direction, but we need to do more to make it safer for bicyclists. And if we get more what we call micromobility, which is scooters or other devices out there, we want them to be as safe as possible. So we're looking to do more of these projects going forward. Then we've got your typical infrastructure needs. If anyone's familiar with the Bermuda Seawall down south of Adamo Drive, it's not a pretty thing. It's falling apart. When we get done with it, we're going to be able to put a nice wide trail along it with landscaping and make it a real attraction for people to go down there and use it. And it connects all the way to a beautiful DeSoto Park, which is an awesome park that has lots of things for kids. So we want to shore it up and make it strong and safe, but we also want to make it multi-purposed and have this trail component as well, so it becomes a neighborhood asset and not a neighborhood eyesore. We've got Brewery and Cass Street bridges. Much of our maintenance money in our plan will go towards these projects. They're very expensive. Both, as I said, those bridges are over 100 or about 100 years old. And so again, on the top portions of those bridges, we'll be looking to add those same pedestrian bicycle elements on the deck part, but the underneath part, not looking too good. They're very old, need a lot of upgrades. They don't sell the parts at Sears, so it gets very expensive. So we'll be putting a good amount of our maintenance money on those three bridges to shore them up and give them a little longer useful life. And then finally, our transit project in the city, we have smaller things that we do in cooperation with HART around our bus shelters. But our signature project is our streetcar extension and modernization. We'll be looking to take this into the 30% design stage in 2020, and also starting a feasibility study to see where do we go from here. Right now, we're planning to go to Palm Avenue. There's an interest to go up to Seminole Heights. There's an interest to go over towards the airport. There's an interest to complete the loop through Ybor. We've got to decide where should we go next. We want to keep expanding the system and making it a true mode option for all of our Tampa residents and, of course, our visitors as well. So on to the buckets. I love these buckets. They kind of remind me of when I used to take my kids to the beach. The buckets, as I said, line up very nicely with how we prioritize our projects. We prioritize our projects using the principles of maintaining the system, reducing congestion, adding safety, and repurposing our roads through bike ped projects to make our roads fully useful for everyone. So what we have done is we've taken the money that we're getting from the referendum, and we've calculated what those minimums are per the referendum. There's a minimum amount we have to spend in each bucket. And so we've made sure that for each bucket category, we are meeting or exceeding that minimum per category. And so your project plan that you have in front of you will share more details of this basic concept, that we have done just that. We've met the minimum in each category. And again, feel very confident you'll come to the same conclusion when you review our information. So again, I just don't want to belabor the point, but this is a very transformative tax. I'm personally hopeful that those in Tallahassee that will be deciding on our future will see the IOC process as a very positive experience that we've had here in Tampa. It all made sense. Everyone's on the same page. Everyone wants to stick to what's in the referendum. We're certifying that we've done that. And just in Tampa, just for 2020, we'll be able to start 28-plus miles of complete street projects, touch 5 neighborhoods with major resurfacing and other sidewalk upgrades, address 2 of our key bridges along our Hillsborough River, address the needs of 50 intersections throughout the city, and add 50-plus miles of new sidewalk and bikeways throughout the city. That's just the city of Tampa. So this is very transformative. This is just the first year of the 30-year tax. If you can imagine 30 years from now, it's going to be like the Jetsons. It's going to be wonderful. We're so excited. So again, we've submitted our certified plan.
I'll be 100.
We've had a PE sign that plan. We're happy to answer questions at the appropriate time going forward to show that we are in compliance. And look forward to many more creative projects such as our intersection painting that we do in some of our neighborhoods to try to make our system as useful and safe and available to everyone that it possibly can be. So I thank you for hearing me out and listening to our City of Tampa plan.
Thank you, Ms. Duncan. That was very detailed, and we appreciate that. We are now going to go to questions, and I want everyone to ask every question you have. This is why we scheduled these long meetings. So I want everybody to be comfortable. Senator Joyner, then Mr. Germonte, then Ms. Sullivan Moore.
I would like to know, how do you determine where you're going to spend the money? You said that the city councilmen were concerned about their districts, as they should be, and the city as a whole. But what if you had 2 sections of town that had the same problem, in the same East Tampa and New Tampa? How do you determine where you would put the resources to address the problem? Because I detect a lack of projects listed in East Tampa.
Yeah, this is a very good question. It's lots of science and a little bit of art, I would say. We try to use the facts as much as possible to help us make our decisions. And the facts are, what does the infrastructure need? Is the seawall falling down and the road's about to collapse? Is it a broken sidewalk? Is it a traffic signal that needs to be upgraded, but it's only 10 years old, it's not 30 years old? So we look at what the infrastructure is telling us. We have to do this, I say horizontally. We have to look at traffic signals, we have to look at sidewalks, we have to look at intersections. We just can't make one linear list and do it that way. So it's a very fact-based, data-driven approach, but we also do have to look to make sure, let's just say, for example, that the roads in South Tampa are older than the roads in New Tampa. We can't just spend all the money in South Tampa. That's not right. There still needs in New Tampa, even though those roads are newer. So we have to try to look at how critical the need is, along with making sure there's equity amongst the neighborhoods and amongst the city as well. So it's a little bit of give and take, but we try to go back to the facts as much as possible, because then we can stand behind our decisions if we do that.
You said equity. And I'm still perplexed as to why there is a paucity of projects listed in East Tampa. There are great needs there, as they are throughout the city of Tampa, but somehow, I guess your system didn't rate them high enough to be on this list. And that bothers me.
I can tell you that for our capital program for this year, which is a small reflection of this bigger plan, we actually calculated out for our 4 council districts how much we were spending in each council district, and it was uncanny how close those numbers came to each other. We're very sensitive about equity amongst all of our neighborhoods. And so there may be things on that list that don't appear like they're East Tampa, but they certainly are. We have an East Tampa mobility plan listed on there. We're not doing that for any other neighborhood. So I feel like I can assure you that the prioritization is fair, and even though that's not really a task of this body, it's certainly a task of our city council and our mayor. And I can assure you, just like the county commission, that prioritization does not go unnoticed. They are scrutinizing that quite closely. And so we've passed their checks and balances, and I would feel that that is hopefully a level of comfort that you get from that when I tell you that we do apply equity throughout our project planning.
One follow-up.
Yes.
When you talked about smart street lights, you said that you would work with TICO and that the sensors would have a lot of rich data. Will cameras be used?
No.
Okay.
No. Cameras are not in the streetlights at all. There are no cameras. No.
All right.
No.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the global level. I was looking at all these projects today while I was having repairs done on my car, and I have to say that I think the people thought I was crazy, because by the time I got done looking at everybody's projects, I was really so excited. I don't want to appear I was cynical before, but I felt like I was going to look at a list of where the jurisdictions were trying to stick things in that were funded from other sources and all that, not really meet the letter of what this referendum was about. I think this referendum passed because there was something for everybody in it, both in the city and the other, city of Tampa and the other jurisdictions. But I think all the jurisdictions did a great job. They got the spirit of what this referendum was about. It was oriented toward kind of fixing the gap that's existed throughout my entire career, as you mentioned, between pedestrians and other users of our public spaces being treated in anywhere near an equal basis to the automobile. And I've only been not working in downtown Tampa for 4 years, but when I come back here and cross the street, just coming here today, it's just so much safer and better than it was. And this is like a giant leap forward. As you said, this is just 1 year of just a whole change in direction. And having worked with your engineering department at the city 20 years ago, I can't imagine any of them not laughing really at what these projects were. So, we've come a long way, and I know there's details, as Senator Joyner mentioned, and it might be good to show how the money spent with this tax fits in with other efforts of the jurisdictions to make sure that all the neighborhoods are treated fairly. But it appears that all the jurisdictions are on the right path, including Hart, of actually addressing the issues that have needed addressing for my entire career, I think. And so I'm excited that we're off to a good start. I hope nothing happens to undermine this really positive effort.
Thank you.
Again, the plan is very well thought out. I appreciate that. But I have a specific question regarding operating expenses when you were talking about salaries and wages. You mentioned consultants. Is there any plan, since this tax does not end? I work for an entity that has consultants that have been around for as long as I have. Are there plans to actually get staff hired that works for the city of Tampa? Or is there a percentage of
Yeah.
consultants that you would use based on regular staff? How is that going to be
We
implemented?
have asked through our, we put together we called it the penny budget, and we called it our regular budget, this being the penny budget. And so we put in there for our mayor's consideration, a handful of positions. I don't believe any more than 4. For example, someone that's really going to focus on Vision Zero and be a champion for that, some engineering support. So we will find out about that, again, I should say when the tax is supported. And that'll be a mayoral decision of supporting that request, because they're very sensitive about adding permanent staff to our current, list of employees, but that is something that will be considered.
You're good? Mr. Hunter?
First thing is, I was pleased to at least see what you presented from the standpoint of a certified engineer certified to this when it was given to the city council. That's my understanding of how the process is to work. Again, that's mine. And my understanding is that this is not to support new growth. And as I look through all of this, this is to support essentially existing communities and trouble spots. And I want to commend you on what I've seen there, at least from my perspective. One question on sidewalks is, and I'm glad to see efforts there, is hopefully the city council is not waiving sidewalks on new growth based upon we're coming back and replacing and rebuilding sidewalks on old growth. Perhaps you might carry that back.
Yes, and I do know that they have gone back and forth on that over the years.
I know that.
We definitely support continuing to, like we were saying, incremental progress.
Don't waive sidewalks.
Yes.
Okay,
So I will carry that back, and I appreciate you making that comment, too.
thank you.
Let's go, Patrick.
Yes, so I understand your comment about prioritization and weighting the different projects across different neighborhoods and different parts of the city. Do you have a mechanism to ensure that from year to year, because obviously this is just one year's plan, but how do you ensure that from year to year that the money, these same neighborhoods don't keep coming up as the higher priorities while others get perhaps left behind? What's the mechanism to ensure that equity across?
Yes, it's an excellent question, and again, as the county does and others, we have used similar, if not the same protocol, year after year when we develop our capital improvement program for the city. So for example, this year, we all had a budget that was approved by our respective councils or commissions of projects we're going to be doing with the money we already have right now. The same protocol will be used when we get this new wave of money coming in, and that is we have to look at, again, the facts of the system where we believe the needs are, but of course, being fair and distributing those monies across the board. And like I said, all of these plans that will come to you will first have to be approved by the city council, the county commission, the Hart board. And so that's another layer of those very interested elected officials wanting to make sure that that equity is being reflected in the projects we're proposing. So that's been baked in for a while. It's not a brand-new thing that we're dealing with here. Personally, I feel like it works well. Not everyone is always happy, and occasionally there is some flex because there's one big project that sucked up a lot of money. For example, we have a project in East Tampa that's about $5.3 million for one roadway. It's taking a lot of our funds for that. We only get $10 million of gas tax. So, but the next year, we'll have a big project somewhere else. So it seems to work out year by year as well as cyclically in terms of how the money's being spent on the resources. Because again, we look at the infrastructure and what that's telling us of what the needs are. But it is a sensitive thing, and we are very aware of that, and we are very thoughtful when we do our project planning.
Are you good, Ms. Kilpatrick? Yes.
I've got a question that tags on to that. I would just say, if there are certain neighborhoods that have been underfunded for many years, and now we're saying, oh, it's all equal, then they're still being underfunded, because there perhaps should be some neighborhoods that need to catch up to other neighborhoods. Does that make sense? So if it is totally equal, then I would say it's not
And again,
equitable.
this is a 30-year penny, so we can't, everyone can't be in the first year of the penny, which we wish they could. And I don't say that insensitively at all, I just say it's just a matter of, fact. And again, we do our best to be not leaving anyone behind, we really do. And we have our city council members and our mayor and the county commission, trust me, making sure that's the case. And of course, other active citizens and other folks wanting to know, why are you doing this where? So we have a lot of oversight on that. The media covers these things. It's out there, so it's nothing that we're not used to. But again, the engineering side of things, we do the best job we can to be as fair as we can, because we want to see everything get better. We really do. That's our job. That's the reason we're in these jobs. We could probably be doing other things, but we want to make things safer and better for everyone. That's our whole, we get our high off of that. So we do our best we can with what we have to work with. It's not an exact spread every time, but we feel like it's pretty fair. And if the councils are approving this, the commission's approving it, that's a vote of confidence right there, I would say, that we're doing something right.
Mr. Hollenkamp.
Ms. Duncan, can you tell me a little bit about the certification process, particularly how you determine how you allocate certain hard-to-identify things like salaries? It appears you have some new wages here, and you somewhat evenly allocated them over 3 different categories. How do you go about determining that, and then also whether those are within the definitions of the respective buckets?
Yeah, again, reading the referendum and knowing that that's baked into everything we're doing. There's a couple of different ways that could be approached. That could be approached by collecting up some of the excess of the flexible funds and just putting that on it. Or it could be approached by including that into the project categories. For example, we need an engineer. The engineer's gonna be working on all of these capital programs. So that was the approach we took because we have such a handful of needs in that area. It wasn't extensive, so we thought that was a good approach to take. And again, we were very thoughtful about following the referendum. We have really good counsel here that was advising us with any questions, our attorneys. So we feel pretty confident that all that was done per the requirements.
Any other questions, members? Yes, Mr. Fernandez.
I waited till last because I have a few.
Well, you want me to go before you then? No, I don't want
If you, well,
No, you're good.
You can shut me up anytime. You're the chair.
That's why we're here, man. Go ahead.
I'll just swing back. Gene, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'm one of the 2 City of Tampa appointees to this committee, and for that reason, I probably spent more time on this offering than I did any of the others. Hillsborough came close, and certainly Hart too, but I really fly-specced this thing. And I suspect there's going to be a lot to be discussed in subsequent meetings during our workshop, but I just want you to understand that whatever I say now is not meant to be critical in any way. I'm kind of looking at this sort of as if you had presented it to me over coffee, and I'm offering you some suggestions, more so than being critical. I know there's a lot of
Appreciate that.
There's a lot of hard work. And I certainly don't want the city council pissed off at me for thinking they shouldn't have appointed me, but, it's the way it goes. First of all, I want to get in the weeds a little bit in terms of terms that are used in our various line items. You were kind enough to address complete streets already. The city actually has a website portal dedicated to complete streets that has a lot of the information that you provided. So just so we, want to make sure that we understood between you and me and everyone else on the committee that complete streets is a term of art. It means something in the planning world.
Yes.
It's not just a throwaway. And for that reason, I was a little bit concerned when I I saw the use of the term complete streets, for instance, on table 1 of your, which we've been given. Table 1, line item 1, 21st Avenue, Nebraska Avenue to 50th Street, a complete street safety improvement. That's the project name, which would suggest that there's complete street treatment to come, right? But then in the project description, I note that the term complete streets is not included in the product description. So
Okay.
I assume that deletion is a deletion with a meaning. By comparison, if you look at line item 2, that project name also has complete streets in the project name. When you go to the next column over for project description, in that little box, it does have the term complete street roadway improvement. So those distinctions continued throughout the 16 or so line items in table 1.
Okay.
I think of the 16, there are only 5 of them that actually name complete streets in the project description. The rest do not. So I want to understand.
Yes.
You know, I'm thinking if somebody that lives along Nebraska Avenue and, you know, to 50th Street were to call me tomorrow and ask me, what is that thing that you all were asked to certify last night? I want to make sure I know what it is that I'm putting my name to if there's a good housekeeping seal of approval thing.
Yes.
So why the difference? Why don't they all say complete streets? And if they don't, why does one get it and the other doesn't? How do you come to those conclusions?
Yes, I can basically say that that's probably just, you know, being in the business, that term does mean something, but there wasn't a realization that we needed to be so specific to reinforce that in the project description. What the project description does, for example, in the first, bicycle ped facilities, crosswalks, sidewalks, those elements, those define what a complete street is made up of. So we're describing the elements of a complete street. We just didn't put complete roadway improvements or complete street roadway improvements. And I apologize that that caused any confusion because that was not our intent. It just, I guess someone was thinking they were being a little redundant. But those elements, such as I just mentioned, that is what we are doing to bring the project to more completeness from what it is now, by putting in those different elements that are mentioned in the description. So if that is something that we can clear up through me answering your question, or if there's another way to answer it more thoroughly for everyone, that's basically my answer to that question.
I just want to be clear that we're speaking the same
It is,
the same language.
they are all complete street projects, and the way we decided on the funding was, what's the main thing the project's doing? That was kind of how we tied it to the bucket or buckets we were using. So yes, I think if we put complete street on all of those, it's exactly what we are intending to try to communicate, and it's probably just an oversight on our part that we weren't being that specific in writing the descriptions for you.
Okay. Well, I'm cursed being a lawyer. I get tied
It's
up with these little things.
Good question, though, because
We all.
you have to wonder, why is it here and not there? I'm the same way. If I don't understand something, then I start going to comparisons, because that's all I have to work with. It's a great question, and I hope that answered it, and I'm sorry if that did cause confusion.
Well, no, not confusion, just.
Or caused a question to be
just-
asked.
Just the
Yes,
question.
yes.
And if we can resolve that by saying that perhaps in the next iteration of this table, we're going to see complete streets as a commitment for each of these projects and not just 5 of them, that would make me feel better.
Yes.
That we really know what it is we're certifying, all right?
And I
Is
guess
that a fair request?
that is very fair. The question would just be, how do we demonstrate that commitment to you? Maybe that's a.
Putting it in the language.
Okay,
Because this is all we have to work with.
okay.
I don't know what.
But I
Mr.
wasn't sure if, apologize, I didn't know the process if, once the plan is certified, that's the plan, or if there's resubmittals of it with adjustments. I'm happy to do whatever the
I would
pleasure
ask
of the
staff
committee is.
and council, I think there's time for amendment, obviously, because we're not going to vote to certify this until the next November 21st meeting. So I think
Okay.
there's time and the
Okay.
ability to do that, correct?
Well,
Sound agreeable, Beth? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's a clarification,
Okay.
not really a change. Change to the verbiage, but not really a change, just clarification.
I mean, as long as you all accept that my concern is well-founded and it's something that could
Yes.
be corrected by adding 2 words, then
I
yeah, that's what I'm
apologize, I
asking.
didn't hear what Mr. Hamilton said, but Beth was just advising of doing a memo to clarify, if that's the mechanism that works for everyone. Does
Okay.
that sound okay?
Memo, that you will do a memo to us?
Well, again, I will talk to Beth and Dr. Wong and find out the logistics, but I'm happy to do that memo, or our certifying engineer could do the memo. We'll decide what's the best way to communicate that commitment to you.
Okay, well, let me move on. Like I said, I
Okay.
have more than one question. That was just number 1.
Okay,
Number 2, again, definitional. As we work through the various line items, we see some that are designated in parens design, others
Yes.
that are designated in paren design and construction, and then others that are designated in parens only construction.
yes.
So now my concern turns to what it is we're being asked to certify. Again, what am I putting my name to? What are my colleagues putting their names to when the citizen calls us tomorrow and says, what did you agree to? So on line item 1, you're proposing $500,000, $500,000 for a design related to First Avenue.
Yes.
Right, so I mean, it's not for us to critique the amount or any of that, I'm not going there. But if I understand correctly, if we were to say, yeah, that looks good, and we certify that as compliant, all that is doing is certifying that you will go forward to study the plan, to come up with a design, and before it goes anywhere else, as an actual construction project, assuming you want AFT funds, you'd have to come back through this process again.
Yes.
To have the construction phase certified, correct?
Absolutely correct. As you can imagine, transportation projects take a number of years to go from concept to concrete. And so we often have planning, design, sometimes acquisition, and then construction phases. So in this case, we're just funding the design phase of this project. Next year, depending on how long that design takes, you will see the same project in there again for the construction phase to be funded. Because when we get this money, we don't have everything 100% ready to go out the door with shovels in our hand. We have to develop the projects first, and then have that set of construction drawings put out to bid, and then have the construction get underway. So design, construction, those are the phases that are being funded in this 2020 plan. That's absolutely correct.
And just looking at line item number 1, that's just design.
Yes,
But in line item 2, it's design and construction.
correct.
So if we were to certify that line item as compliant, that bird has flown the coop.
Yes.
That won't come back to us again.
Right. Yes, yes, sir. Unless, I don't want to complicate things, but let's just say there was another phase that had a similar name. But yes, it's flown the coop. There'd be a new project with a design phase and then construction. So,
Okay. All right, thank you for that. Let me see. Question on engineer certification. I guess the best way to do this is to go to table 3, is the neighborhood improvements.
So I think the was for her now. That's what they're looking at. They're setting themselves
Okay.
for that.
Now, when I read through these 5 line items, it struck me that the first 2 and the last 2 had reasonably specific items of work that were being identified. Going back to my hypothetical citizen, if somebody were to call me tomorrow from the Bon Air neighborhood, I could probably defend a decision to certify this based on, at least I'd know what I did, right? I can't say the same thing about line item 3. in this category.
Okay.
This is for Terrace Park roadway improvements. I don't even know where Terrace Park is. Well, I saw it on a map. I've never been there. I don't know if I know anybody that lives there or not. God bless them. I'm sure
It's
they're
actually in
wonderful
our North Tampa area. It's our District 7 of Councilman Vieira, so it's up in that part of town.
people. Okay, that would explain why I don't
Yep.
know it. I'm not up there very often. That's my bad. But the point is, when I read this, it says, for the description, this project provides for improvements to various roadways within Terrace Park, period, full stop. That really doesn't tell me anything.
Yes.
And, you know, frankly, I'm scratching my head a little bit as to how an engineer could certify that as compliant based on that information. Now, the others, maybe so. This one seems kind of a child of vagary. So is there a way to put more meat on those bones, or is there
Yes.
something that Mr. Martinez certified that he had available to him that we do not? What's missing?
Yeah, so a couple things on that. One is Mr. Martinez is intimately familiar with every single project because he is over our capital programs. And so in this case, we should have put more detail on the description. He knows exactly what we're doing because he personally has that information. So there's a couple things we can do. One is we can certainly add that detail, which we should have had. Excuse me, I think I pushed the screen there. The second thing is, just like we do year after year for our capital improvement program, as the county does, we're preparing fact sheets, project fact sheets for every single one of our projects that have the details of those projects in them. Because we need to know more particulars of exactly what we're doing. So I'm not sure if this process is envisioning having those project fact sheets for you or not, but at a minimum, we can certainly add the detail into this table 3, and again, include that in the addendum memo that we're going to be planning to submit to you.
I would appreciate that.
Okay.
I mean, I can just tell you
Yeah,
as
I
myself.
don't blame you. It's very vague, and can't
I
really
would-
say why, but this was a very labor-consuming iterative process, so I do apologize if there was things that didn't seem to be quite
No, I mean,
exact
there's
as
there's
you would
nothing,
like.
there's absolutely nothing.
But we're
to
happy
apologize.
to adjust those things so it is clear, because that is our job, is to make it clear to you, and we want to do that.
Okay. All I'm suggesting is, it would be very difficult for me to vote to certify that
Sure.
as compliant based on
Yes.
that language.
I don't,
And-
yeah.
And I dare say that's not the only line item among these tables that I could say that about.
Okay.
We just don't have till 2 in the morning to go through everything here.
Okay.
We do have some time, and I would follow up perhaps with you or with staff about the ones that I have concerns about. And if you think I'm correct, or at least have some merit in my objection, that maybe you would, beef them up a little bit.
If it's the pleasure of the board, we would be agreeable to taking more particulars that have been identified and addressing those in our memo that we're going to be providing.
I would suggest any submissions that have similar language. I share the concerns that are outlined by
Okay.
Mr. Fernandez in terms of the vagueness of the language, so that would probably be well received.
Okay, we'll certainly do that, Mr. Chairman.
I don't know that I'm necessarily done with my questions, but I'll pass the talking stick for now if I can get it back later after others ask
It's
questions.
a marathon. We'll give you the baton back.
So I'm going to piggyback, and I wasn't going to mention it, but since we went there, on the North Tampa neighborhood resurfacing, you did mention it was 109th in Nebraska to 30th Street. That would be helpful,
Oh, yes, okay,
because
yes.
North Tampa was a little
Right.
broad, and I was trying to imagine what area of
Okay.
North Tampa you were
Good-
speaking about.
Good point. I know my team's taking notes here, so we'll make sure we make that adjustment as well. That was a good catch.
I just have 2 questions that are general. What community outreach are you going to undertake as you described in your
Yes.
presentation?
We're really looking forward to that. Some of you may be aware that our mayor has a transition team in place, and she has 5 priorities that she's working on, which are transportation, workforce development. She's looking at our construction services group, also looking at our resiliency and sustainability, and, sorry, I'm missing one. Affordable housing, thank you. And so as part of those 5 advisory teams she has put together, under the Transportation Advisory Team, some recommendations are going to be coming out in a few weeks, which are going to speak to stepping up our game, I'll call it, on public engagement for transportation. So we're looking forward to seeing those recommendations of how the city of Tampa, for transportation, can start to have more and frequent public engagement more proactively on the front end, as I mentioned earlier. And so we're looking forward to those recommendations giving us more guidance specifically on how we will be doing that, no matter if we have just the gas tax to spend or whether we have all for transportation to spend. It'll just be a matter of quantity, but our approach is going to be much more sophisticated than it's been in the past in terms of public engagement.
Thank you. And what does vulnerable communities mean?
So I guess that's another thing that could be defined differently by different folks. I'll give you the best definition that we have, and that is our communities that, whether there is a physical challenge, a financial challenge, a challenge of I don't drive, but I do know how to ride a bike, whatever that personal challenge is, we try to make sure that our projects are reaching everyone in those terms as far as choices for everyone, no matter what that challenge is that you may have. And so that's how we're looking at it from the engineering perspective.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Fernandez?
Oh, are you offering the talking?
Yeah,
stick?
baton's back to you. And
Okay.
we'll get to you, Mr. Lemke, if you've got some more questions.
Got it. Table 2. Line 1, the Inner Bay Boulevard corridor improvements. I think this is one that you actually had up on your PowerPoint as one of the projects you highlighted. The project description is this project provides for roadway improvements to relieve congestion, improve safety, and provide bike-ped connectivity. It's a design project. My question is directed to the words "to relieve congestion" and what it is that may mean, because depending on who I'm talking to, relieving congestion may mean slapping on an extra lane. It may mean something else. But does it have a meaning in the context of this project that hasn't been shared with us, or is that yet to be determined in the design phase, or where are we?
Yes, that'll be determined through public engagement and then our design development. We haven't specifically identified that we would just, for example, we don't already know that we would just be putting in a right turn lane or left turn lane. We know that we need some kind of improvements to the intersection, and maybe more than one intersection, and we would be looking at a variety of things to improve those intersections, anywhere from geometric improvements, which would be lane additions or lengthenings, possibly roundabouts. So those details aren't available at this time, but we do know we need to address those intersections to add capacity in some fashion.
Okay, so these, what you're moving toward is a capacity project that focuses on an intersection as opposed to a lane addition.
It's relieving the congestion of the intersection, which basically is, in many cases, adding capacity.
Right.
Or possibly a combination of capacity and advanced traffic management systems, where we're using the signalization in a very creative way to optimize the intersection throughput. Again, we don't have the exact details at this point in time. We just know we've got several tools in our toolbox to address the congestion. And so that is our goal for the project, is to go through that design process to pull out the right tools to relieve the congestion for that project.
Okay, so if I could, just to bring it in for a landing, make sure I'm understanding what you're saying to me. The congestion mitigation that's being considered relates to various modalities that could be applied to an intersection.
Yes.
Which the word intersection doesn't appear anywhere in that project description, so I don't know where anybody would get that idea. But
Well-
if that's what it is, that's great. I don't know what intersection you're talking about.
So the
number
project
one.
goes from Manhattan to Bayshore along Interbay.
Okay.
If
Is
you
it-
look at a map, there's streets that cross that roadway between point A and point B.
So that's what we're talking about. We're
And
talking.
so the main way to relieve congestion typically is you start with the intersections. Those are your control points. Because as goes the intersection, so goes the corridor. You can add all the lanes you want, but if your intersection isn't improved, you're not going to go anywhere. So again, apologize if it's sort of this inherent understanding that we have when we talk about these projects. But we're looking to relieve congestion on that corridor through some of the tools in our toolbox, which have not been identified as yet.
Going back to that cup of coffee that I said we were having, right?
Mine might need a little vodka in it, I'm sorry. Just kidding.
He's buying.
I'd be happy to. My concern is simply this. Under the referendum language, under the ordinance language, and Sam, I'm sure will correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, the congestion mitigation things that have to do with the intersection, that's fine. You can address congestion by enhancing intersections. The problem comes when you're tacking on extra lanes for capacity. So and everything you just said, you're planning on looking at here had to do with intersections. So there would be nothing for me or anyone else presumably to object to.
Okay.
Unless the design comes back really squirrely. But,
So-
so I'm just wondering if there might be a way, again, getting back to what we said earlier.
Right.
To put a little bit more meat on these
Okay.
bones to make clear that you're talking about intersections and congestion mitigation related to intersections, a la the language of the ordinance and the referendum.
So is the concern is that the way it's written, there could be an actual plan to like widen the roadway when that's really not what we're talking about? Is that,
Yeah.
okay,
It's part of it.
okay.
You know,
Well,
it gets back to the
I-
question, what
yes.
happens when the citizen calls me and says, what did you
Okay.
approve?
Well,
I'd like to
we-
be able to know what it is we
Yes.
approved.
New automobile lane capacity is excluded. I
Yes.
think that's what.
Gotcha,
And we
okay.
it needs to be clear that
Okay.
this doesn't apply to that.
And that you're focusing on the
We
intersection,
will
which you're fine.
certainly modify that description more specifically and include that in the addendum so that it's very clear congestion mitigation is not, lane widening per se.
That would be wonderful.
Okay.
Fernandez, let me jump back to
Please.
you. Mr. Lemke, Mr. Chiramonte, and then Judge Menendez.
My next question is about Table 9 and operating expenses.
Okay.
Just thinking in a kind of ordinary citizen that voted for this, I'm not sure that people thought about that they were voting not for something in the city, but they were voting for operating expenses. So could you maybe talk about some of the program management support, the salaries and wages, like what kind of capital equipment? What are these things?
Sorry, I'm missing a page here. Okay. So, again, per the referendum, we have the opportunity to make sure that not only do we identify projects that we need, and we can design and construct those projects, we have to have a way to execute the projects and implement the projects. We can't just put this on the backs of the resources we have right now that exist within our agencies. So these operating expenses are the things that we would spend to make sure we can implement those projects and execute them. And apologize if I didn't quite get the full part of your question because I was getting the table here.
Maybe I would just like to know, like, what are some of those expenses, like, how many salaries, who are the salaries for? Capital equipment, it
Okay.
says large equipment, machinery, I'm just curious what that
Do we
is.
have a breakdown of that, Milton?
And I guess part of my question too is, it seems like the city is getting $49 million in tax. It seems like the city could say, we'll provide a copy machine. I don't know if that's what capital equipment is, but.
I'll let, Milton Martinez is our chief transportation engineer, and he certified our plan. So I'll let him answer that question more specifically. I apologize, I didn't have that detail right in front of me here.
Good evening. As Gene mentioned earlier, we had submitted in our capital budget for the fiscal year '20, we submitted in our operating budget we identified some needs for additional staffing and additional heavy machinery to help us execute our projects. Those haven't been approved yet. That's at the discretion of the mayor. Those are under consideration. So there are several, as you mentioned earlier, several engineering positions. There's a Vision Zero champion position there. There's also we've identified some needs for some traffic signalization, replacing some of the bucket trucks that are kind of aged out, and getting some new paving equipment as well. So it's those kind of heavy, multi-thousand-dollar capital equipment. It's not for copiers or things like that. It's for some of the equipment that would help us execute our program.
Do you know how many salaries are included in this?
We estimated there's several positions there. We haven't settled on, since they haven't been approved yet, we haven't settled on an exact number, but we have a couple engineering positions in there, project coordinator. So there's probably about, I have to get back with you on the exact number, probably about 4 or 5 positions listed in there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Germonte.
This is a clarification, kind of back to Rick's discussion. You can use money from other sources if you wanted to add a lane to that road, correct? And combine it with money
Yes.
from the tax? Okay, I just wanted to clarify. Because in the county, you probably are going to need lanes widened, and I understand this tax should not go for that, but the money could come from somewhere else, maybe from that $800 million that was allocated for the next 10 years that the county did.
There is some lane additions, lane widening that's allowed under the referendum. We in Tampa don't have much of that other than maybe there would be some intersection turn lanes. The county, I would imagine, would have some of that, but it's limited. That's the key with the referendum.
Right.
They put the buckets so that everything didn't go on just road widening. They wanted a balance of the money being spent in this way, which, like I said, we're already doing this as a matter of routine, so fell nicely for us, and I know to some extent the county. There is some lane widening that's allowed, it's just you can't go past a certain amount. And I know everyone's very sensitive and cognizant of that, and our certified plan should reflect that that's not happening.
When you say a certain amount, are you talking about money or distance? Or
I'm talking
design?
about bucket percentages.
Okay.
I would love to get an answer on how much for lane widening, because to me, when I read the charter, I thought it said none, but.
Maybe
Well,
Mr. Hamilton might want to,
I
Speak to
agree.
that?
I'm a little bit gray on that, too.
The remaining funds.
Sorry to jump in.
No, you're fine.
Yeah, I guess there's a couple ways to look at it, and this would only apply to Tampa and the county, Hillsborough County, because the two smaller jurisdictions, Temple Terrace and Plant City, are not subject to it. It would be expenditures in the 5th category, which I believe, I always forget what it's just called, remaining funds. That's sort of the open-ended category. I think also, and this might also require an explanation from a transportation engineer, which I am not, to say the least. The new automobile lane capacity definition doesn't, strictly speaking, absolutely preclude any lane widenings. There are, if you look at the definitions, so it's really going to depend upon the specific project, but it says projects that consist of adding additional lanes for automobile traffic to existing roads or streets that are not related to intersection capacity improvements. So they're, depending upon the particular fact pattern, what the project is, there may be a little play there as well, but the general excess category is the 15%.
How much? Excuse me. 15% of what?
The allocations,
Of the bucket?
correct. That's the 5th bucket. When you do the math and you add all the numbers up, you have the, excuse me?
The remaining is?
Correct.
Okay.
Judge Menendez.
I have a question for Sam.
You're fine.
Maybe 2. Or maybe even 3. I was just wondering, did you just indicate that, and I'm looking at the charter amendment, paragraph 8, which says that purposes of this section, new automobile lane capacity, which I understand is a no-no, means if it means projects consisting of adding additional lanes for automobile traffic to existing roads or streets that are not related to intersection capacity improvement or constructing new roads or streets. So under this, I read it to say, okay, if you've got some monies that are related to intersection capacity improvement and it deals with adding lanes, that's okay. But your comment was that the 15% or whatever it was, general purpose, could be used for lane widening, period?
Correct.
Oh, okay. All right. I was under the, I was under misimpression then, because I was going to ask, and so I thought that the lane widening was, or at least maybe we could do something. I was going to suggest, or ask, if in future certifications, if there could be something that at least as to those first 4 buckets, that none of these funds are going to be used for adding, using the language of the ordinance and make us feel better that, okay, we've approved X number of dollars, the percentages, and we know because we were told by a certified engineer that none of those monies are earmarked for adding additional lanes, et cetera.
Yeah,
Is that feasible to get that in the certifications we get in the future? Some sort of,
They're saying yes.
Okay.
And I just also wanted to add, I don't have the
Great.
language right in front of me, but the way the actual charter language is structured
Yeah.
with the 5 expenditure categories, the prohibition that new automobile lane capacity is only tied to the first 3.
the first 30.
The first 3 buckets.
Okay. All right, well, maybe if that certification could say that none of these monies in the first 3 buckets is, don't stand that down yet, I had another question for you. I had a legal question for you. You're my lawyer.
I'm not going anywhere, Judge.
All right, I was wondering, would it be feasible then to say in a certification that none of the money that we're pouring into the first 3 buckets is being used for additional lanes? Is that something that can be presented to us by the agency so that we then can say, okay, we don't have to worry about that now? We don't
Yeah,
have
I
to
mean,
deal
it
with
certainly seems plausible. They'd have to address it,
It
because
might,
obviously.
might help alleviate some folks' concerns. Now, the next question I had is that, looking at one of these things that Mr. Fernandez, I think, was talking about, no, I forget now. Let's see. Here we go. The project, neighborhood improvements. Okay, we had one that says, this project provides for improvements to various roadways within the neighborhood. Okay. From your viewpoint, is it the purview of this committee to actually look to see what those improvements might be? In other words, is it going to be a retarring, fixing a pothole over there, fixing lane markers to make them clearer, repaving? If so, which street? Do we get down into that type of detail, or are we supposed to look at the submission and decide, okay, we've got a certification from an engineer saying we're spending this money, this is the amount we're spending, and we've added it up, and we've actually gotten the percentages, which I wanted to thank you for doing that, because I first started looking, I said, well, how am I going to figure out these percentages? And that the percentages are within the charter amendment, and here it is. Are we supposed to go and look beyond that? Is this committee's, task to say, okay, well, show me which potholes are being fixed. Show me which lanes are being repainted or repaved. Or is a statement like, well, we're going to do improvements to the roadways in West Tampa, period, or in East Tampa. You see what I'm saying? How detailed is this so that people on this committee can feel comfortable saying, okay, I want to vote for it. They told me the buckets in the first 3 buckets are going to go for what it's supposed to go for. Heard nothing to the contrary. We have a certification here from an engineer.
No, understood. I think you can certainly ask for, if there's a particular project, let's just say the city of Tampa has 4 projects and says they're under the congestion reduction category, just by way of example.
Okay.
You can certainly ask, well, how is that the case? What are these projects? How do they reduce congestion? If you have a question as to whether they're placed in the appropriate category, certainly that's a fair question, because you would ultimately be certifying that they are.
We're asking all sorts of questions, which are fair questions. But my question, I guess, to you, maybe this is not a fair question, is if we don't have the specific information saying, what are you doing in East Tampa, West Tampa, North Tampa, in that neighborhood to relieve traffic congestion? I want the details. I want to know where your lights are going. If we don't have that information, are we precluded from relying on the certification and approving it? Or do we need that type of detail, in your opinion, before we can even take this up?
I mean, I think I'd have to, I can't really weigh in on what this committee is ultimately comfortable with in making its decision to certify or not. Now, as I understand it, some of the questions that were asked earlier, they were questions seeking more detail, which I can't say myself because I have not seen all the backup from the city of Tampa, but I think it's probably a good assumption that there is far more detail, that the documents that were presented were, for brevity purposes, just brief outlines, if you will, summations of various projects. And I would assume, I hate to do that, but just for argument's sake, that there is far more detail specifying, with far more specificity, the backdrop from the projects. Hopefully that helps answer the question.
No, but thank you anyway.
I mean, I would just say, I'm going to get to you, Mr. Fletcher, and then go. This member, I don't think this project provides for improvements to various roadways within Terrace Park. I don't think that's enough, but I do think this project provides for street resurfacing, traffic calming, and pedestrian infrastructure improvements for the roadways within North Bon Air neighborhood. That's enough, for me at least. And it doesn't have to be which pothole, which sidewalk, what house, but I need more than we're doing this in Terrace, North Terrace. That's just me for your purposes. Mr. Fletcher, and then Mr. Hollenkamp and Mr. Lemke?
No, I don't have any more
Okay.
right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Just to follow on that somewhat, the operating expenses section I had some concern about, and I asked Mr. Hamilton, and he indicated that clearly operating expenses are included within the scope of the statute and the ordinance and the charter amendment. It would be helpful to have a little bit more detail on the type of positions, some confidence that it's being spent just on these projects, same with the equipment, that type of thing. So when the follow-up comes in, that would be helpful to have.
We have that breakdown, and we can certainly provide that to you, not a problem.
Thank you.
Mr. Hollenkamp.
This question's for Ms. Duncan. Working through the 5 buckets here, we said that the limitation on new automobile lane capacity only applies to the first 3 buckets. The 4th bucket regards bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, so presumably that's also not going to apply to the 4th bucket, which leaves the 5th bucket remaining funds. Under this plan, you don't have any allocated to that bucket.
Right.
So then is it fair to say that under this plan, it does not include any new lane capacity?
Yes. Again, the county is different. Theirs does have some of those projects, I would assume, and you'll hear their plan shortly. But they're meeting those same requirements of the referendum to not exceed that amount.
Any other questions? I'm going to go back to Mr. Fernandez.
No, I've overstayed my welcome already.
No, you're, yes.
I had just one concern. You spoke of roundabouts. Is this something that is a pilot program, or has it been proven that they actually relieve congestion?
Roundabouts, there's a lot of research out there if you're interested. Those are the safest treatment we can apply to intersection in terms of safety. In some cases, they can relieve congestion. It just depends on the particular intersection. But the relieving aspect is you never stop at a roundabout, so you don't have a traffic signal situation or a stop sign situation.
I'm very familiar with roundabouts.
Yeah, I apologize if I was not.
Have they been proven, though, that they actually are necessary?
Yes.
Yes.
I do have one more, very simple one. The current trolleys are sort of, they seem touristy and old-fashioned looking. One of the pictures seems something more modern looking.
Yes. Yeah, so our project is actually the extension and modernization
So they'll go
of the
faster?
system. So we're looking at speed. Of course, we want to balance that speed with the environment that we're in. We're looking at a more accessible on and off boarding where it's at grade, where you don't have to go up steps and down steps. We've got people that are not too agile anymore, or they have baby strollers or other reasons that you don't want to be stepping up and down. So we're looking at a more modern system in terms of energy efficiency as well, safety. So, but the looks of it and also the boarding will be a big components of what we're looking to modernize with the extension as well.
They won't be bullet trains.
No, no, no.
I know.
Mr. Hunter.
I'm sorry, that raises a question with me, which is, I've been out of the loop for a few years, but is that essentially what they're calling a modern streetcar?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Any other questions, members? Thank you. We will see you, I believe, on November 21st, and if you can
Yes.
get some of that clarifying information to
We will
us.
provide that detail, and our
Great.
goal is to give you as much.
And to be first, that was good. That was good. Now everybody else knows what to expect, right?
I feel good. Now I can sit back and enjoy.
All right.
But I
Members,
appreciate your time and your interest, and we'll get you those details, because that is our job, to try to give you that comfort level. You have everything you need to feel like you're certifying
great.
for your marching order, so to speak, from being
Thank you.
appointed on this committee. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Members, do you need a short break before we go? Okay, let's take a short, and I mean short, 4 or 5 minute bathroom break. We'll be right back.
Supper coming?
Huh?
Supper?
Pizza.
It's not in the budget.
That is not allowed pursuant to the tax law. It's in the wrong bucket.
Transportation, are you?
I better check my voice.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Guess Hillsborough County.
Said that
they're going to ask for a continuance.
No, no, I got the call, I got it.
I didn't get that.
See you. How's it going? Let me ask
Johnny.
All right, we are back. Want to go ahead and restart us so we can be efficient with everyone's time. We've got folks coming in now. I do want to announce that the City of Tampa, I want to announce to the members, the City of Tampa will receive questions via email. So if you will email Johnny, Dr. Wong, if you email him the questions you may have that you want to get to the City of Tampa, email him and he will coordinate within 2 weeks, sorry. Email him within 2 weeks and he'll coordinate getting those responses and making sure that we receive the information we need to by the next time we meet so we're comfortable with the certification of the City of Tampa's plan. So with that, again, we thank the City of Tampa for being number one. It's always hard to go first. Let's go now to Hillsborough County, who got to see that and ought to be veterans at it now. So we will be ready to receive your submission. Thank you.
We owe Gene Duncan a big one. Good evening, committee members. My name is Lucia Garces. I am the Deputy County Administrator in Hillsborough County, and my responsibilities span all of the things that get built in Hillsborough, so water, wastewater plants, water lines, all of the development and permitting, all of the solid waste, but as well, they include the transportation program. So I am here today to tell you a little bit about the transportation program in Hillsborough, a little bit about the Surtax, and then certainly available to speak with you about the questions that you may have. We've learned a lot from Jean, and so we're going to tuck a lot of her questions away in our pocket and think about those as well. I'd like to just start by saying that our Board of County Commissioners approved the program that you have before you on the 18th of September. It was submitted to the MPO on the 27th. It did come back to us for some modifications because there were some rounding errors that resulted in minor discrepancies in the percentages, and it depends on how far past the decimal point one goes. So we worked those out with the MPO, and you have those in front of you. So I wanted to take you a little bit through the Surtax plan, but also tell you about kind of the transformation that Hillsborough County is undergoing in a lot of its land use and transportation. I've been here along with Ray and probably Bob for lots and lots of years and watched this community. We are moving from adolescence to maturity as it comes to transportation and land use planning. And what that really means is we're beginning to think differently about how we look at roadways, how we look at mobility, how we look at moving people, whether they be in cars, bicycles, on their feet, or in wheelchairs. So we really are starting to rethink kind of this whole notion of transportation, thinking more about mobility than a road corridor. It has been, I will tell you, from my perspective, managing engineers and planners. We have planners now who can speak about sustainability and land use issues, and we have land use planners who can speak about different engineering components of a roadway design or a sidewalk. So it's been really exciting in that regard. Having said all that, I will stop and find these. Where's my? Go. So a little bit along the lines of what Gene Duncan presented, we want to talk to you about our existing mobility system, about the guiding principles that we have embedded in how we think about things, how we think about priorities, which is very, very similar to the City of Tampa, collaboration initiatives, and then the project plan as well, and then the allocation distribution. So our existing mobility system, if you will, includes over 7,000 lane miles of road. So those are 2 lanes, right? So pretend you're from Tampa to LA to Seattle to Boston and then back again. That's about the extent of our transportation roadway system. We have about a little less than half of that in sidewalks. We have 63 miles of regional trails, and that's really an area for us to use this surtax to grow and improve and look at trails differently. We also have 552 signalized intersections and 271 bridges. I think what's really important to to raise, though, here is that as we think about Hillsborough County unincorporated, it does represent about 800 square miles. And what is really interesting is if you look at the history of how it developed, places like Riverview, Lutz, Ruskin, and Brandon were all nodes that developed historically for economic reasons. But shortly after World War II, when the automobile came, we changed our pattern of development, and so a lot of areas that include, outside of Brandon, they include all of the Carrollwood, Town and Country, et cetera, really was based on an automobile focus. What we're trying to do is convert to think about retrofitting our suburbs and bring places into the suburban areas to bring a whole lot of things. Placemaking, if you read, works well for millennials, it works well for reducing costs, it works well for housing affordability, and so it works well on a lot of different fronts. So we're trying to look at where those nodes can happen, because those nodes also offer opportunities to reduce trips. Those nodes offer opportunities for people to live, work, and play in certain places, so they have to travel less and offer them different opportunities for travel. Our guiding principles really do center around a couple of things. Maintenance, of course, is something that will show up, not only has shown up in the city, shows up in the first bucket, and vulnerability. Vulnerability, as Jean said, is something that a lot of jurisdictions are looking at. The state of Florida requires us to look at something called the Perils of Flood Act. And so vulnerability becomes very important to us. The University of Florida Design Center just completed an incredibly two-year-long assessment of vulnerable areas. And so immediately we think of vulnerability as places where our infrastructure is threatened, where our housing is threatened through either storm events or sea level rise. We think of those as being by coastal areas, but University of Florida went beyond that. They looked at vulnerable populations. So when you lay on top of vulnerable areas, where are those households that are lower in income, that are also faced with vulnerability from storm threat and such? So we are compiling a picture of vulnerability that we've never had before, and it will serve us well as we think about infrastructure improvements, and land use. The other piece that has become inherent in how we think about things is Vision Zero. And I think what's important is you think about Vision Zero and you think about complete streets, they're not independent. These things come together. Complete streets really do help reduce fatalities, they help reduce pedestrian accidents. But we are looking at Vision Zero. We've embodied the study that was done by the MPO that identified the Vision Zero crash corridors, and you will see a number of them as part of the initiatives that we would start with this Surtax program as well. I think as well, as we move on to congestion relief, we talked a little bit about congestion relief and the peculiarities of going with congestion relief. Is it adding a lane? How does that work when you widen an intersection? Do you actually, an intersection improvement, as Jean has said, has done a number of things. It opens up that bottleneck on a corridor, but it also provides safety. It also adds turn lanes. It also adds pedestrian features, helps with stormwater, et cetera. So intersection improvements have turned out to be a really good return on investment for us in a number of different ways. But I'd like to talk about health and mobility and smart growth together, because one of the things that is happening in Hillsborough is we have redefined how we think about the design of roadways. As I said before, PD&E, project development and engineering, or environmental, however you might know it, actually is being redefined now, because before our engineers get engaged in the design of a roadway, we really engage planners. And so they begin to look at land use and how a corridor actually functions. An example of this is 131st Street in the UACDC area, where we are looking at the very specific elements of a corridor of 131st Street from US 41 to 30th. that corridor changes dynamics all along. It is not a long corridor, but at some point, it's suitable for cars to move with appropriate median, et cetera, constraints, but at some places it really does just focus on pedestrian movements. And so before engineers got involved in looking at what to do with 131st, which parenthetically I might say was initially started as a project just to move vehicles from US 41 into the university. So it's really starting to rethink of how we think about corridors that carry cars and people and bicycles and scooters and whatever else we may have. I think that that also then begins to apply to how we think about transit, because as we think about transit too, we have to start thinking about how those corridors and nodes intersect. And so what is the appropriate kind of node for a particular corridor? What is the appropriate transit? We're eager to begin work with the Planning Commission, who has a grant on transit-oriented development, but really understanding at a level of pixel, if you will, a different kind of dynamic that's occurring in how people are moving and where they're moving. This, of course, allows us to look at different income groups and how they travel. Affordability becomes a key piece as we think about where affordable housing needs to be located. It needs to be located near transit corridors. It needs to be located where people can walk in lieu of drive. And so all of these different elements begin to come together in what we're calling the retrofitting of the suburbs, but also in the celebration of moving from adolescence, where we weren't sure what we were, and kind of gangly and voices changing and everything else that goes with adolescence, to truly being a much more mature community that really has an understanding of all these different components. So, much like the city of Tampa, we have focused on maintenance, safety, and congestion for years now. One of our challenges has been that, especially as it comes to maintenance, we have been woefully underfunded. And so when it came to road resurfacing, which we'll talk about a little later, all we could do was resurface the collectors and arterials and couldn't get to the residential subdivisions. Many of those have remained unsurfaced with potholes until our board has allocated money. They have allocated separately from this $25 million a year to road resurfacing. This would bring another $8 million a year in resurfacing of roadways, primarily geared toward residential communities. But bridge repair, rehabilitation, repaving, and sidewalk repair, I can't tell you how many trip and fall suits we get for folks who have tripped on one of our sidewalks because it's been in disrepair. One of the challenges, quite frankly, as you try to maintain a community in tree-lined streets, is those beautiful trees are sometimes the ones that lift the roots. So we're looking for all kinds of creative solutions on how to address those issues. Safety, we work with the school board in safe routes to school, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but school district has eliminated busing for anyone living within a 2-mile radius of a school. So what does that do? If the road conditions and if the travel conditions are unsafe for children to walk to school, parents will get in a car and drive their children to school. They drive their children to school, they're causing more congestion on the roadways. So there is a cascading benefit of addressing some of these safety issues that dealing with schools. Trails, we have initially thought about trails as recreational opportunities. We are beginning to now incorporate them as we look at corridor design, ensuring that any east-west road that we build, like 19th Avenue, Gibsonton, Boyette, Big Bend, Lutz Lake Fern, all of those are beginning to connect to a network of trails. As Jean talked a little bit too about smart technology, signals, we've updated all of our signals now to have LED lighting, and moving on to the next generation of signals where we can actually have signals begin to talk to one another. Also, much like Jean has mentioned, in the last hurricane, particularly Irma, our signals went out. And when signals go out, the rule is everyone stops, except if you get to those intersections in unincorporated Hillsborough, Bloomingdale, and 301, there's nothing there. If all the lights are gone, there is no way to know, so that there's even a signal that you might be approaching. So the whole notion of using solar to back up electrical power has been something that we are now embarking on, and a real asset to us. We talked a little bit about intersections, signal congestion. Again, we will have some capacity widening projects that are coming out of bucket 5, which does allow us to actually add lanes for vehicular capacity expansions. But anytime we do that, we will be looking at those with all the ancillary accoutrements that go to ensure safety. A little bit about collaboration and engagement. Our partners, so City of Tampa, HART, MPO, and Plant City and Temple Terrace as well. We do lots of little projects with those two smaller communities. They should never be underestimated into the value that they bring to this community. But we work with the jurisdictions all the time. MPO recently was awarded funding from our Board of County Commissioners to continue the work of Vision Zero, so it will continue that work. We are excited about working with a long-term agency and looking how that impacts operations, trying to ensure that we bridge it appropriately. We work with a host of them, of course, the Expressway Authority and any expansions that it might have. School district is absolutely key as we look about getting children to school safely. Sheriff's Office on enforcement issues, and I think that covers the bulk of them. I think in terms of engagement, certainly there are homeowners associations in unincorporated Hillsborough are a key component of our engagement, whether it be Bloomingdale or Fishhawk or whichever homeowners association. We often get called to homeowners associations to speak on a whole variety of issues. The photograph that you have below is a meeting in Sun City Center, a very active and engaged community. 700 people showed up to speak about improvements in Sun City Center. So in addition to these individual meetings that we have with organizations, anytime a capital project starts moving forward, so as we start talking about improvements that may be made in an intersection, a roundabout or such, we go out to the community multiple times reviewing what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, how that impacts. And there are many times improvements that are made or considerations that are brought to us by community residents about how something could or could not work better. I think on the notion of roundabouts, I'd like to say that outside of this program, we have about 7 roundabouts underway. And so we can talk about roundabouts as improving safety features because they are in and of themselves a traffic calming component. They do move traffic. However, they also can provide a lot of iconic feature as a sense of place. So our Board of County Commissioners has looked, I think, on 3 or 4 of these, and actually in the middle of the roundabout has asked us to procure and work to identify art pieces that would be appropriate. Whether they would be bicyclists or bicycles in the Balm area where there is a lot of bicyclists on a Sunday morning. There are features of goddesses who provide who are linked with the agricultural world. And so this has become an incredible way for Hillsborough County, which really has lacked that sense of place, to begin to identify nodes of some kind of iconic recognition. The Surtax plan, the screening criteria, as Jean has said, there is a lot of technical analysis that goes along with this. On our road pavement, which we'll talk about, our crews survey our roads every 3 years. They drive around and they sample the pavement of all of the roadways in Hillsborough County. So those 7,000 miles of roadway that you saw, those get covered every 3 years to determine what the pavement condition is. Parenthetically, pavement condition and maintaining our assets, there's a financial benefit to all of that, and that is because there are accounting principles that require us to maintain our assets. So we are then able to meet those requirements. As well, crash data, it becomes critical when it comes to prioritizing intersection improvements. School safety study, we work very closely with the school district and the MPO to identify which schools are in greatest need of having improvements made, pedestrian improvements, whether it's an expansion of sidewalks, crosswalks, and then also with the Sheriff's Office on crossing guards as well. The National Bridge Inspection Program is the foundation that we use for analyzing our bridges, and our 271 bridges get reviewed and analyzed every 2 years. In addition, the community plans and community engagement provides a lot of input for projects. Our sidewalk program namely comes from a lot of the calls that we have received from citizens and repeated calls in certain areas for sidewalk improvements, especially where there are cracked sidewalks or sidewalks that are dangerous. As well, many master plans and studies, Vision Zero, a trails master plan that was recently conducted that has identified priorities for moving the trails program ahead, and also opportunities for some grant funding as well. So multiple different things. I think the one thing that came up a little bit in the previous discussion is the plan that we have before you is the 2020 plan. It actually includes about 2 years of funding because we're not able to spend all of the money. The challenge for us has been is that these plans and these scopes have been put together with existing staff. So right now, my operating budget for running the transportation program in an unincorporated Hillsborough is about $74 million. Those folks are dedicated to delivering a capital program of $400 million over the next 6 years of all of the maintenance activity that goes along with it, the traffic management center. So we have done, what we have prepared for you today has been with some consulting services that we have obtained, and as well, we have done it with in-house staff. So it's taking staff off of existing projects to do the work. Once we start going, this is the italics on the bottom, that as we go into the Surtax program and the money becomes available, we will be looking for additional staff and or consulting services. So the question that you asked Jean about how many positions, how many, will it be mostly consultants, is it both? That right now is underway. So in our line item, you will see project delivery program, I think is what it's called at the very end. And so that's somewhere around $7 million, which represents less than 10% of the total amount that we would be obtaining in any given year. We will be working on that plan. We don't have that yet. We are working through the pieces of, does it make sense to outsource to consultants? Does it make sense to hire staff? What kind of staff do we hire? Do we hire engineers? What is it that our needs are? And that needs assessment is underway with our Human Resources Department right now. And I think we'll have a better feel as we move forward what that project delivery model will look like. What is the balance between consultants and what is the balance between staff? I think, as Jean mentioned, consultants can provide expertise in an area where our staff may not have it, and it may not be fruitful to keep our staff trained in areas that might be specific to a narrow node of, for example, advanced technologies that we might be using. So those are the kinds of things that we just have to balance out, and we don't have those yet, but we are working through those pieces right now. So going through the Surtax categories and the project types, much like the graph that you saw provided by Jean, we do, however, have the remaining funds category, which is the purple one on the far right side. So we talked about what those look like, and I think without going through more detail on this, what I'd like to focus is on the project types that are identified on the left-hand side in the left column for you. But what it does say, I think, is that no one project discretely fits in any one program. Maintenance and vulnerability, maybe, and additional clear delineation of capacity in another. But the others, there really is benefit, for example, of an intersection project that could reduce congestion, provide safety improvements, and improve the bicycle and pedestrian network. So there is some flexibility that moves across those three categories. So maintenance and asset preservation, we'll be talking about these four categories. I won't stop here because we'll have more detail as we get into this. Did we miss? Was Bridges first? How did we? Resurfacing. As I said, the thing with resurfacing that's happened is we haven't had the funding for resurfacing in the past. As funding has increased, when we had limited funding, we focused on arterials and collectors, because those are the ones that get beat up the most. They carry the largest amount of traffic, heaviest amount of traffic, move the largest amount of cars. The neighborhood ones have not had that, and if you look at any engineering requirements, you'll see that the requirements to resurface arterials and collectors is a lot more frequent than neighborhood. But our neighborhood roads have been unfunded for quite a bit of time. And so this program really does give us the opportunity to begin to address neighborhoods. So we've got 95 miles of neighborhood roads. And then all of that brings a safety component by reducing potholes and truly maintaining the asset. If you talk to an engineer about the maintenance of the surface of a road, there comes a time, it's like re-roofing your home. If you don't re-roof it frequently enough, you get to a point where you have to replace the whole roof. And so is true of the maintenance of roadways as well. You need to maintain it so that you can resurface it without having to completely remove it and rebuild it, which is much more expensive. So that's the preserving the asset. But it also improves safety. Some argue that potholes are good speed bumps and they slow traffic down, but they also result in other things like lawsuits about broken wheel axles, et cetera. But truly, the resurfacing of roadways is critical. Sidewalks, I think we talked a little bit about sidewalk. Why did I miss bridges? Sorry.
Going pretty fast.
Yep, hold on. We want to go back. Oh, there's the arrow. I couldn't find it, thank you. Nope, I want to go back one more. Thank you. So a little bit about sidewalks. Again, sidewalks have been grossly underfunded over years. We look forward to the opportunity to do something with sidewalks here, especially as we think about sidewalks as an alternative method. Also, the more data you read about healthy communities, healthy corridors, you recognize that sidewalks and appropriate sidewalks helps reduce a lot of the health ailments that are often plagued for folks who are sedentary and don't have the opportunity to move enough. I think I missed something. I just want to tell you everything. Bridges. So bridges, 27 bridges scheduled for in this year one bridge rehabilitation. upgrading to new design standards as they become available, and again, a key safety and vulnerability piece. But they also create connectivity. And so one project that's not in our list for the Surtax is the Maydell Bridge crossing over into State Road 60. It really has reduced the ability for emergency vehicles, for pedestrians, bicyclists to move across, and commerce as well. So bridges are critical. Well, critical because that's what they do. They connect, right? This next category, so the first category came out of bucket 1. The next set of projects that we're going to be talking about can come from category 2, 3, or 4. And this one that we're calling quarter complete street improvements, I think, again, why we use the word complete is because we are rethinking how we build roads. We're not just moving vehicles anymore, we're moving people. And so the importance of recognizing all of the ingredients that are important to a corridor, a mobility corridor, become really important. 17 projects underway. They are depicted on the map. To Bob's point, these are not to accommodate new growth. These are really existing deficiencies that have been significant in our community for a while. Sheldon Road becomes a key one, Columbus, Gunn, Bloomingdale, Sims, Bears, Boyette. I think all of them. I think the other one that is in the list is Oakfield in Brandon. And I want to underscore Oakfield in Brandon because downtown Brandon is a really cool place. If you haven't been there, you ought to take a trip because it really is the old Brandon where Brandon originated. Oakfield is a tree-lined street, and we have put forth our efforts with some work that the Planning Commission did, and now we are undertaking looking at sites of how we could rethink the connectivity, improving the road network, actually looking to see how we could start siting different facilities, and particularly looking on the siting of a library in the Brandon area to create more of a community. There was recently approved a 700-unit project in the Brandon Main Street Overlay District, which is just north of the Crosstown Expressway and south of Oakfield and west of Paul's Drive, east of Lakewood. It was required to build a grid system that can eventually connect to the rest of the grid in Brandon. And so we are really excited as a model of retrofitting the suburbs of having this opportunity, but recognizing too that this surtax will provide an opportunity for us as we redevelop to maybe in future years set aside some money for creating those connective grid patterns in areas that maybe once had them or can be retrofitted to have them. And then, of course, as we said, is looking at some point of developing a future master plan for future projects because we really need to understand where we go from here. Countywide trails projects, again, looking at trails in the past as recreational opportunities and now completely rethinking how they begin to connect to our roadways and offer alternative ways for people to get around on bicycles, have a roadway that connects to a trail and a trail that connects to a roadway. Upper Tampa Bay, Courtney Campbell to the Upper Tampa Bay. South Coast Greenway is a major one. George Road, which came out of an MPO study that was done, I think that one is an important one to understand, and a series of others that are included in those long sheets of paper that you're looking at. Expanded safety lighting. This is, these are street lights. In Hillsborough County, street lights in neighborhoods are paid for by street lighting districts. So as a developer builds out a project, they begin to incorporate a street lighting district. So if you live in unincorporated Hillsborough, you might pay a street lighting assessment for street lighting in your area. What that means, though, is we covered residential areas pretty well, but a lot of our collectors and arterials remain unlit. And so from a safety perspective, this program now begins to bring street lighting to those collectors' arterials, particularly that have had high incidence of accidents and crashes. Intersection and operation safety improvements, talked a little bit about the multiple benefits that an intersection brings. It really is one of those things that has a high return because once it's done, it does have the ability to reduce congestion, it has the ability to increase safety, and provide alternate modes of transportation as well. Safe routes to school. These 15 areas are the ones that the MPO school safety study identified and the school board has confirmed. These areas identify that 2-mile radius. So what is happening is we need to now, we know where some of them are, but we need to study really the areas that need the major improvements. And so this will begin to improve those sidewalk programs around schools themselves. And again, the closer schools are to the rest of amenities, the more we begin to unlock the notion of communities, because historically, schools have served as an anchor for communities where bonding occurs, and it still does. People take their children to school, but if they just drop them off in the car and go, if you drop and go, you don't have a chance for an opportunity for interaction. So the more we can engage people in getting there in different ways and connecting to the rest of the community, the more this Surtax program has benefits reaching far beyond just moving people and cars and bicycles. It really has the ability to begin to transform who we are and what we look like and how we live. The smart traffic network, Jean talked about the cool things they're doing. We have a traffic management center. We are, and it is being reconstructed, not with this money, although I'll tell you about something in that line item that you see. As part of an effort to harden our facilities, we are moving our traffic management center, which now does not meet even a Category 3 requirement. So if it gets blown away, the benefits of having one go down. So we are reconstructing one along with our service units. What you will see here is additional equipment that would be needed to continue to enhance the benefits of being able to time the lights, to move the traffic, to do everything from getting ambulances, from getting fire emergency vehicles moving quicker. And so this is a piece that becomes really important again, and truly not something we could have undertaken without the Surtax. This is bucket 5. So we have a bucket 5. And this one does, because Hillsborough is still dependent on automobile and capacity. So vehicle capacity, if I could just say parenthetically, isn't just for cars, because vehicle capacity can move buses too. So I think as we think about capacity for vehicles, we ought to remember that buses need lanes as well, and they need concrete to drive on. So the 4 corridors that the board has identified to look into is Lutz Lake Fern, Sly Avenue into the airport, into the Tampa Executive Airport, Orient Road, and then the last one is Gibsonton. And Gibsonton, again, gives us an opportunity to look at Gibsonton as a community. How are we all doing? Because we're doing okay? All right, good.
And when we scheduled a 4-hour meeting, we're excited.
Yeah, don't stop, don't take a break, keep going.
Not me, I'm good. So coming to the grand finale, The Surtax allocation buckets, and ours look more like flower pots. Jean's look like buckets, ours look like flower pots. But really getting into the buckets themselves, I think what's important is that we, again, have identified what you see here is the revenues for 2 years. It's year one program, but because we haven't obtained those revenues yet, it becomes a 2-year revenue stream that has been identified by each of these buckets. And I think the important piece here to note is that our current capital program, in any given year, we are moving about $80 million out the door. So this one was going to at least double our capital program in any given year once we move out of this 2-year backlog. But we're going to move from about $80 million a year, moving out the door, to about $100 million. Our 6-year capital improvement program that's on the books right now is for $460 million. So that's what we anticipate. So this is on top of all of that. To answer one question, though, that I think Ray will ask, so before Ray asks it, I will say, none of the funds that are identified here supplant any funding that we have had. So there has been a program that the board adopted. We fund our transportation program through gas taxes, some old community investment tax, and then we have some general revenue, we have mobility fees, and we have old impact fees. None of what you see here supplants the programs that are already in place. So I just wanted to, for the record, to say that. And having said that, I am open to your questions and look forward to them.
Thank you for that presentation. Members, we are open for questions. Representative Rollerson.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Very good. Real quick question. South County is exploding.
It is, yes.
Riverview and that whole area is going bonkers. And I noticed in the roadway pavement preservation projects and corridor complete street improvements projects, not a lot going on in that area. Is that because, again, this is dealing with existing infrastructure and that the county should be building a lot of new roads in those areas? But can you kind of explain the interplay between that and what
Sure.
the thinking in the future is for those particular areas?
So as it relates to the resurfacing program, those roads are relatively still newer. So there would be less of a need for the resurfacing component in South County than there would be in a town and country or elsewhere in areas that have been really untended to for quite some time. On the roadway, let me just get to my corridor complete street. There are still some roads in South County, I think, as we look at Sims, as we look at Boyette. So there are some improvements to be made. I will tell you, outside of this program, 19th Avenue has been already funded by our board, so we are looking at 19th Avenue. That creates a huge east-west connector just north of 674. The other one that's a really important connector is the Apollo Beach flyover. So that would go from US 41 through Waterset across the interstate. So that is a major piece. Big Bend Road, lots of collaborative effort with FDOT, major intersection improvements, interchange improvements, as well as improvements that then extend beyond that piece as well. So there are other projects that are listed already in the capital program that are addressing some of those South County needs.
Very good. Thank you.
So to piggyback on that, in the South County area, I know when they're building, they have to account for schools. And is there a portion for these contractors to help with the building of the new roads?
Yes.
That's the first question.
So Hillsborough County has had an impact fee since 1989. It was not adjusted until 2016.
Yes.
So just to give you an idea, when we finally switched over from an impact fee to a mobility fee, which gives us much broader ability to tap into sidewalks and trails, et cetera, it's a broader use of funds. So we, yes, now do have a competitive mobility fee. So for average single-family home, it's somewhere around the $4,000 mark. But those are the funds that are being used to address a lot of the impacts caused by growth.
And my second question, I can follow a majority of the maps, but for points of clarity, the roadway pavement preservation program, you're doing a lot, which is appreciated, but it's really hard to tell based on the map. Is there any way we could get that in a tabular format by sector?
We can do the tabular format. Yeah. We can absolutely get you the tabular format. We have that piece as well, so we can provide that for you.
That would be great. Thank you.
Mr. Hunter and then Mr. Tremonte.
Lucia, I'm impressed. I think your presentation was very clear with a very complex subject. I go back to ask the question that was asked of the city about, I assuming you're not waiving any new sidewalks relative to new growth, primarily in South County, that we'll have to come back in another 30 years and put in new sidewalks?
We are not waiving any sidewalks. We're not waiving any sidewalks.
Okay. Two other general questions. As I see your bridge work, that is for the current traffic. I'll use, for an example, Fishhawk, as opposed to anticipated new growth in Fishhawk?
On the list now, if it is because of an existing deficiency, so that is why it's on the list.
The last question I have deals with that bucket 5, but, and I think you've done a great job on staying within the urban service area, the county has. The corridor complete street improvements project, I look at the Lutz Lake Fern Road, is that consistent with the community plan?
I believe it is, because there's been an outreach program on Lutz Lake Fern, so they've gone out and looked at it. And interestingly, Lutz Lake Fern will have at least two roundabouts. One that's called the Peanut Roundabout, because it actually kind of goes like this to accommodate. So it will have two roundabouts.
And they know about it?
Yes, they do, right? Have we gotten there yet? If they don't, they will. I think there's been an initial meeting. We will check that for you.
They're pretty active. That was my only question. Thank you.
Mr. Tremonte.
Thank you. I just want to compliment you and ditto to everything Bob said about what you did. I think the part of Lutz you're talking about is the small part that's in the urban service area, not the other part of Keystone and Lutz.
And I think just to say on Lutz Lake Fern, one of the things that we've discovered is we will build Lutz Lake Fern, but then we will continue the trail all the way to the west to connect to the Upper Tampa Bay Trail.
No, that's good.
So without the road, we're still going to go.
I just want to emphasize the importance, and you did touch upon the safety lighting. I hope that means like eventually continuous lighting on the arterials in the unincorporated county. I mean, that to me is the biggest gap that's missing for safety. Now that those areas have urbanized and you have people walking along them at night, and it really is not good.
Yeah, and absolutely, that's what's happening now is the assessment based on where are the highest priorities in terms of accidents and
I think any major 4-lane or 6-lane road that doesn't have streetlights in an urban area is a problem.
concur.
I have two questions. One, how do you coordinate with other agencies that are spending dollars? Do you coordinate, and do you all make sure that you're being efficient with regard to if the city's doing something that, if it needs to be, you coordinate with them to make sure it's all kind of playing well off each other?
I'll give you two examples of coordination. One is Big Bend Road and the interchange. DOT has been an incredible partner. And I didn't know if you meant just the cities or if you meant other agencies, because I'll give you three,
The
four.
second.
I have more. Okay.
I don't need
So
two or
just the
three.
cities, okay. So just put aside DOT, excellent partner. Here's my commercial for. DOT has done an incredible job on trying to figure out how to fast track the interchange at Big Bend. So that's a big piece. So in the city of Tampa, one thing that we are working through, it is a collaborative effort, but it has not been an easy one, is bay to bay. So we have roadways that are county roadways within the city of Tampa. And if you followed that conversation, you know that it was a very challenging one. And so the next step is for us to sit down, and we've been talking about how to best do this, because there are some roadways where the city of Tampa ought to be able to speak to its residents, allocate money, and determine how to design that roadway that really is those are folks who vote for the mayor, vote for the city council, and need to have that opportunity to engage in that. We work with Plant City, for example. There are a number of projects that we have done along the airport to improve economic development opportunities by Plant City, and a couple of others in Plant City. In Temple Terrace, we're looking at Bullard Parkway and looking to see whether we can partner with them on some improvements in Bullard. So believe we have a really good relationship with all of our other municipal partners.
And my final question is, can you point to me in your project summary here where you are spending money on new automobile lane capacity? And how can we be sure that you're only using bucket 5 to pay for it, based on what's in front of us here tonight?
So we will go we'll go backwards, if you will. Let's go with bucket 5, which is the, my pages are out of order, which is the one that identified here. Let me just tap you back. Okay, so this is bucket 5, and this is the one where we identify road widenings. And so you have 4 of them, and this is the place where we are saying we are adding capacity. We are looking at widening Sly Avenue to provide better access to Tampa Executive Airport. The other bucket where there is a conversation about inherent capacity that will be created is in the category that deals with, did we call it? Corridor complete street improvement. May have, but that isn't even vehicular capacity. I think the other place where vehicular capacity comes in is in the intersection program, because as I mentioned, when you widen an intersection, it does create additional vehicular capacity. You may add a turn lane, you may add a left turn lane, right turn lane, and so you end up creating additional capacity for vehicles in the intersection program.
Let me rephrase my question a little bit then, because I'm asking it a different way then. I'm looking at this spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheet or whatever. Is it correct to say that on page 3, not on page, I assume 6, where there's a 5 by that, is that the only place where you are widening that meets the definition of new automobile lane capacity?
That is correct.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know. Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Fernandez.
Thank you, Chair. Hi.
Hi. Are we having coffee too?
Well, we can.
You better hope.
I'm open. You were sitting here during the city's presentation
I
with
was.
Jean, right? Okay. If you recall, I asked Jean questions about the parenthetical description about projects as either in the design phase or the construction phase or both. You all don't use that definitional in your line items. Might it be possible to designate projects according to where they are in the life cycle so that we have a better idea of what it is we're funding and when it is the bird flies the coop, if you will?
For sure. I think in this particular case, we don't have any projects under construction. We don't have, so they will be in early phases. But we will, I think that is a good thing to add to this list is planning PD&E or where we are in the initial, where it is right now.
Okay, so did I understand correctly that nothing we've been presented from the county is in would-be construction phase yet? Is that right?
So we will be constructing, we will be building, moving dirt on resurfacing. But I think everything else, you're right, everything, only maintenance is where there will be construction. Everything else is still in early phases.
It would be a great help to me.
Absolutely. I think it would be really helpful as well. And we have worked really hard with Jean to try to get as parallel as we can on our presentations. And I think that would just be another component that would just bring it aligned with the city's presentation as well and bring clarity to anybody.
I appreciate your willingness to do that. The other, if I may, Chair, the other question I had, I guess I'm just challenged. I don't know how to deal with this. You have the 4 projects that are listed in remaining funds. Gibsonton Drive, Lake, or Lutz Lake Fern, Orient Road, and Sly Avenue, on page 6 of 6. At least 3 of those, maybe all 4, but I couldn't find the 4th. The first 3, Gibsonton, Lutz Lake, and Orient Road, those 3 are all also included in our long-range transportation plan for 2045 that I've recently had an opportunity to review as part of the CAC. And you may be at a disadvantage here because you probably don't have this document in front of you, and I'm pretty sure nobody else does either. But all 3 of those first 3 line items are there. And on the long-range transportation plan, the projects are all described as lane adds. It just says add 2 lanes. And then it has project costs across the board for design, right-of-way, and construction. Just taking one, for example, line L11, on the local high congestion roadway candidates for cost feasibility. Page 68 of 72 for anybody at MPO or Hillsborough County that's keeping notes. That's the Gibsonton Drive, I-75 to US Highway 301. It's got a total cost projection of $52 million. And again, this is in the 2045 long-range transportation plan. That clearly reads as a capacity project. Add 2 lanes, period, end of story, and it's a price tag that's more than what you've listed here for the project that you presented it up to us. So how do I read that project description together with this project description, which doesn't talk about lane widening at all, although you just, basically told us that there are lane widening projects? How do I read the long-range transportation plan description and this description and bring them together to make some sense? Because right now they seem inconsistent in some regards. I'm not sure I understand how the project that I'm looking at on the long-range transportation plan warrants the designation as a complete street, yet it appears here as a complete street. So there's some kind of metamorphosis that occurs between one document and the next.
Well,
and I don't.
Beth is here to.
She's the queen of metamorphosis.
A collaborative answer we're going to give you.
Okay. I mean, did that make any sense? It might make sense to Beth because you and I talk a different language.
Sure. Beth Alden, MPO Director, and so what Mr. Fernandez is describing is it's kind of a simplified table of projects that, so the MPO is operating in its long-range transportation plan according to rules that are laid out for long-range transportation plans, one of which specifies that you have to identify if there are additional through lanes to be added on major roadways. Now, how those projects would be designed is really up to the implementing agency. And in this case, you're basically getting additional information from Hillsborough County that they intend when they go out and widen this road that it would have all of those features in the project that would make it a complete street. But in the MPO's long-range plan, we're not required to go to that level of detail. So that's it's really up to the county.
So I should be reading the plan the county's presenting tonight as additive to the long-range transportation plan 2045 document. Read the two together, but one is additive of the other.
Right.
You don't see any inconsistencies?
Not.
Okay. All right.
Well, I just have one question, I guess. You were here, I assume, for Senator Joyner's questions to the city of Tampa about where money is spent in terms of in this community and what parts of the community receive certain funds and projects. Can you elaborate or answer that question from the county's point of view now that we've seen these maps?
So as we talked about project priorities, a number of them, most of them come from data analysis, how data is analyzed, and identifying where the mechanical, technical needs are, also from community plans and engagement. I will add to you that the new lens that will provide additional information is the study that's being undertaken by the University of South Florida, which will help us understand where vulnerable populations are. And I think that will give us insight to then further take this to a place of really bringing the equity issue into the DNA of how we make choices about where we build and what we build. So I think that will be an important layer. It is going to be unveiled to the Board of County Commissioners on Thursday morning. So in case you're interested at a workshop, it will be unveiled. But it really does begin to help us understand vulnerability in a different way, and really from a population perspective as well. So,
Thank you for that. I'm going to beat Mr. Fernandez's analogy into the ground about this cup of coffee. So if I'm having the cup of coffee with someone that lives in the urban core of Tampa, and they ask me, about the county's plan and tell us what's in it for them, the maps that I'm seeing from your submissions don't have really anything that I can see that are spent in those areas that I'm talking about as the urban core. How am I to answer this person over that cup of coffee as to what are they getting out of it?
So this person having coffee, would say, are we talking urban core, city core? Or
Yes.
Okay. So I think what happens is, what doesn't get depicted here are some of those projects that are funded in the city by county dollars. Columbus Avenue is one, and actually I think that is on our list. The improvements to Columbus is in the city of Tampa and will be funded by the county surtax dollars. But for the most part, I believe that the city projects will be funded by the city, except for some of these joint projects. Our projects will fund, the surtax dollars will fund unincorporated. And it is a huge need. And it's, between both of us, we're at 1.4 million people and woefully underfunded in transportation for many, many years. And so we're making up for lost time. And it will take some time to cover all the areas. I think reaching out to, Gina and I have a fabulous working relationship, and when there is a need, whether it's Beta Bay, we struggled with Beta Bay, but we came to a place where we could both agree. But I think there are some projects that the county will fund in the cities, like Columbus, and I think there are some other projects that are county-owned roadways that are within the urban core.
So I get it. So you've got to, I don't want to oversimplify, but you've got to concentrate on the unincorporated areas of the county and leave it to the city for the city portions, except for these projects that you're talking about where you work collaboratively with the city. Is that accurate?
Come, join me. Come have a cup of coffee with me.
You're back on. We're sorry.
Just, thank you for letting me jump up here with Lucia. We absolutely do have a great working relationship, and I just wanted to add in, because I know when you're up here answering the questions, it's easy to sit back there and be thinking of other things to add on. Another thing to add on what Lucia already said, which I totally agree with, is that we work together through our Smart City Alliance to make sure that we're making decisions about our respective resources we're investing so that we're creating a seamless network in terms of our technology and in terms of how we're coordinating the actual capital project. So that's sort of the backdrop of our decision-making, so that everyone is certainly getting something out of this plan. It may not be a direct dot here and a dot there, but the process we're using is directly benefiting county and city, whether you're a county or a city resident. So I just want to throw that in there as well.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other, yes, Ms. Sullivan Moore.
On the program project and delivery, I'm still having a hard time with that figure. Is it possible, and it doesn't have to be now, but to have that broken out into the different categories? Because if I were to say that, someone's going to automatically assume it's salary. So if we can get a breakdown of that, that would be
And I
helpful,
think
as best you can.
And I think that's what we're doing with human resources now, is trying to just even sort out whether it's salary. Do we hire somebody?
Right.
Which, by the way, is really hard to do right now because we are so at full employment. It's really hard to get the kind of professions that we need in this. Or is it consultants, which they're having a hard time, but trying to balance where that need is and what kind of positions those would be.
Yours is at least a smaller percentage than the city's at 3.2%, so I like that better.
Yes.
One question on the Smart Traffic Network Program. There's an item here on video camera system. Can you explain what that includes?
Maybe I'll have somebody else come talk to that. I can't. So just before, I will start it off, and then somebody who knows more will step up and finish for me. But the video cameras are generally the ones that are monitoring traffic. So they're not monitoring people. They're monitoring the cars going through, and they're trying to determine what the timing is of those vehicles. And then somebody else in a traffic center can adjust the dials to keep the lights going. So it depends on, sometimes Saturday morning you will get on a major road and you can just zip right through, and then other times you end up waiting a lot. So depending on what traffic flow is, that's what those cameras are being used for.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
I
Appreciate it.
want to thank you all, but I also want to thank my friend Jean Duncan, who stood before me, on
Yes.
whose shoulders I stand right now.
All of you
So
owe her,
I am grateful to Jean.
Great thanks.
And able to adjust my presentation knowing where you were going with this. So thank you all very much.
Members, I think I'm going to make a change if you all are okay with this. I want to save Hart for next time because I think it's going to be a while. And I'd like to go to Temple Terrace and Plant City tonight and finish those tonight. Is everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Except Hart.
Okay, except for Hart, who's probably mad at me. I'm sorry, but we want to get through your whole thing, Hart. All right, Temple Terrace, if you will come forward. You're gonna get loud.
Good evening. How's everyone doing today? Been a long evening. I'm sure we're looking to kind of wrap things up. I'll see if I can't move this right along. But I did want to say thank you for having us. Obviously, enjoyed the opportunity to meet with the IOC and present our plan. My name is Troy Tinch. I'm the Public Works Utilities Director for the City of Temple Terrace. And I am here obviously this evening to talk about our 2020 Surtax plan. Let's start off by giving a quick rundown of how we got to where we are right now. The city entered into an interlocal agreement with the county in January of this year. The city also then had a corresponding town hall meeting in April to discuss projects. And sorry, is everyone, am I getting good? There we go. I usually project so loudly, I'm afraid that I'm going to blow the speakers out. So anyway, so we had a town hall meeting with city employees, with the city council, as well as the public at large, to basically discuss the draft plan that we eventually presented here to the IOC. At that meeting, there was interaction with all parties involved about those projects, and we basically rolled out what we were looking to do with the Surtax funds. This, of course, then was followed up by the Surtax going into effect in July. The city then approved officially the Surtax project plan in September of this year, and we followed that up, of course, with submittal to you for your ultimate review and hopeful certification. So what is the intent of the projects in the plan? Well, as mentioned earlier, we are a small agency distribution, so we don't have some of the requirements that some of the other agencies in the city or in the county are required, like Hillsborough County and the city of Tampa, because we are receiving less than 5% of the total Surtax allocation. So with that in mind, we still have to keep with the intent of the charter amendment. In other words, we still need to make sure that the projects that we are proposing fit within those guidelines, those categories that are spelled out. And I believe that we've done a very good job of doing that and provided you with our worksheets that we will be speaking to a little bit later. And on the corner of those worksheets on the left side, you'll see where we actually toggle what areas we believe that we are working within with that particular project, what of those categories we are indeed checking off on. So what are we looking for in our 2020 plan? We're only anticipating to spend $250,000. Now, I understand this is a small percentage of what we anticipate to receive for our allocation, and roughly 10%. But the city manager felt it important because we are a small agency, or actually the smallest agency that you'll be dealing with, that staffing-wise, he wanted to kind of gently roll into this process. He didn't want to bite off too much out of the get-go. And we wanted to identify some projects we felt that we could easily accomplish this year. And then as we roll into our corresponding years, 2021, 2022, we start to increase those plans so that they match those allocations. And I'll speak to that a little bit further in the discussion and the presentation. So projects, as far as what we're looking to do, we're looking at sidewalk improvements, bicycle enhancements, multimodal improvements, and wayfinding or signage associated with this year's plan. Here's a map of the city of Temple Terrace. You know, I wanted to ask, are we all fairly familiar where Temple Terrace is located within the county? Yeah, kind of sandwiched in between I-75 and University, if you will. Beautiful little location there. We've got quite an impressive river and a very old golf course as kind of our gyms of the community. And we're going through some changes as well in the downtown community. I wanted to get a little plug on that. So hopefully you'll see some really interesting changes coming our way soon. But back to the plan. So as you can see here, we've tried to kind of touch on all the communities within the city of Temple Terrace with our plan for 2020. Some of those projects, or all the projects actually, that we will be working on. The first of which is a sidewalk project, a design for some sidewalks adjacent to the Woodmont Charter School. As you can see from the map, you can roughly kind of tell the location there. It's adjacent, Woodmont is actually adjacent to 56th Street. That gives you some sort of indication about where within the city. But we're looking to do some improvements for sidewalks to help with that connectivity with the adjacent community, the adjacent neighborhood and the school itself, kind of tie that together. Our next project, again, is a sidewalk design and construction project. So we're looking to do both the design and construction during the next calendar cycle, during the 2020 calendar cycle. This too, in keeping with the school approach, we'll be looking to make some improvements next to Terrace Elementary School. And again, we're going to provide for a safer routes to school for children, allow for safer access to that area for pedestrians within the surrounding community, kind of, once again, tie all those together into one. And this would be the corresponding construction component. And again, I mentioned this earlier, if you look off to the left of the slide, you'll see there where we toggle off, we feel like this is a safety improvement and network improvement. So these are the categories that we're saying, yes, this project toggles these specific areas, and the city engineer has evaluated that and certified that, yes, this indeed does meet those needs. The next project that we would be looking to implement in 2020 would be bicycle improvements. We have a unique opportunity to extend a dead-end roadway across an existing right-of-way over to what would amount to USF. And so by putting this kind of corridor through there, allowing for bicycle access out of that community into the USF area and the amenities that the university offers, kind of open that area up. The next project is very similar in nature. Both of these projects are located in what we consider the Pleasant Terrace community of the city, the northern part of the city. Again, it will be kind of pushing that bikeway, that pathway through an existing roadway, right-of-way, over to the USF area to 50th Street, and again, allowing folks within that community to gain access to the university and vice versa. The next project that we're looking at implementing kind of dovetails nicely with a project that the FDOT is implementing. They're actually going to be letting this project for construction in the next couple of months. It's associated with a HAWK, a pedestrian high-intensity activated crosswalk beacon that they're going to be putting on Bush Boulevard. They've determined this area has a lot of foot traffic, so they want to provide a safe mid-block, if you will, crossing. And this HAWK is something that they've implemented in other areas throughout the city. Probably more notably, there's one on Hillsborough Avenue. It's very evident. If you've seen that, it's
multiple.
Yeah, it's very large. It's very obvious. So it's a new process by which they're working with. And actually, the one on Hillsborough is not a HAWK per se. I think it's just a flashing beacon. This one actually is yellow to red. It will actually stop traffic, much like a traffic light would. So it's a little bit different feel, but it has kind of some of the similar elements. So what we're proposing to do to kind of, again, dovetail with that is propose some multimodal improvements, some bicycle buffering of the lanes to kind of help promote both traffic and bicycle usage within this area. Say, hey, folks, we've got a nice corridor. There's a nice safe crossing here. This is a good place to traverse. In addition, we're looking at implementing some wayfinding throughout the city. We've picked one specific zone within Temple Terrace. The city has been laid out in a grid pattern by our city manager, a series of 12 grids. Grid 10 is actually located down near the Hillsborough River which would be on the west side of the city, so the southwest quadrant of the city. And we look to do some signage improvements within there. And again, maintenance and vulnerability and safety improvements is what we're looking to accomplish with this specific project. And then our final project that we're looking to implement in 2020 would be in that same zone. We really want to kind of focus in that area. And we're looking at doing pavement markings to kind of help with wayfinding, make things safer, make sure that all our center lines are painted, that everything is clear and concise for individuals who are traversing through that area. So what is the future of the Surtax expenditures? I spoke a little bit earlier about the fact that we're only proposing to spend roughly 10% of our allocation for 2020. Well, we are proposing, or we will be meeting with the City Council in a special work session here in November. And it's my hope that we can identify some projects that are in the plan that was actually provided to you, which is more of a 5-year plan. If you look through there, there are plans, there's projects identified in 21, 2, 3, and 4. And we want to potentially pull some of those projects forward, maybe some of the lower hanging fruit, like resurfacing, that wouldn't be as taxing on staff to implement, and go ahead and push those out for this calendar cycle. Now, of course, that would mean you would see me back up here asking for that to be added to our plan for 2020. But I didn't want to get and put the cart in front of the horse here. We need to speak to the city council first to make sure that they're amenable to that. In addition, they may bring up another project that we're unaware of that we feel we can push forward and bring up into the 2020 plan. But really the idea is to sit with them, to talk to them about 2020 and beyond. And speaking of 2020 and beyond, the plan for us would be to build those project plans from 21 on to spend our annual allocation, not to continue to spend less than. We would want to spend at least our allocation. And we would have some surplus that we would be carrying forward. We would want to slowly start pecking away at that as well. So in the next couple of project plans as we move forward, we can really help to evaporate that extra funding. And, you know, again, want to make sure we get our feet under us, that we know we have the appropriate staff on board. If we need to add staff, we do that. Again, being a small municipality, taking on a $2.5 million workload when our budget is less than that for the entire division is quite an effort. So, you know, this kind of gives some credence as to why we've made a determination to go the route we have. So that said, I know that was fairly quick. I wanted to kind of move through that, but I'm certainly happy to address any questions that you may have.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Any questions from the members? Yes, Mr. Hunter.
I had noticed, if you've been here earlier, that the city of Tampa, certified the projects that we received, and then the county, through a consulting firm, certified the projects we received. And as I noticed in reading this, the council approved the projects, and then it says city projects submitted to the IOC for review and certification. Have the projects been certified by your city engineer?
Yes, I have. As a matter of fact, if you look on page 3 of the plan that we provided you, there's a letter from our city engineer with his seal. And this is on the plan, not the
Oh, I'm sorry. you don't have
presentation, on the actual project plan.
that. Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, he did certify, he actually certified the entire plan, which is more than what I presented tonight, more than what we're proposing
Thanks.
for next
Ms.
calendar.
Sullivan-Moore.
So of the projects listed, the only construction I see is Temple Terrace. Is that correct? Everything else is just design
The
costs?
sidewalk is, everything else is designed, that is correct.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Great presentation. We will now call up Plant City.
Oh, boy.
No pressure, but we end at 9.
Or earlier if you're finished earlier.
Just FYI.
Don't give him any incentive.
Okay, save the best and the easiest for last. Good evening. I'm Mike Schenk. I'm the city engineer for Plant City. I'm here tonight to present to you the City of Plant City's Transportation Surtax Projects Plan 2020. First, I'd like to say I really appreciated being last because I could see all the different presentations, and I know as we go forward and go into other areas that we propose to do, I can follow what has already preceded me and make it easier for me. The other second comment I'd like to say is that we do work quite well with the county. We've got a number of projects going on. I have constant contact with a number of different staff members here in the county, and the relationship is really good between the two parties. So with that, I'll go ahead and start the presentation. The street selection overview is one that it starts with the recently completed last year, the pavement management plan that was completed for the city to look at all the streets, to evaluate them not only for the structural stability, but also the pavement condition, provide a pavement condition index for every street that's within the city. The next item was to also, as part of that plan, something that was innovative that is not done normally, is that we had a sanitary sewer assessment done for the sanitary system. That was added as part of the pavement management plan to be able to look at both the pavement condition, the structural condition of the pavement, but also the condition of the sanitary sewer within the roadway to know whether or not we want to either go ahead and proceed with the work that's proposed for that street, or do we want to postpone that due to the condition of the sanitary sewer underneath the roadway. Throughout my career, I've always disliked the fact that you go out and you see a brand new road paved or reconstructed, and then all of a sudden you have a hole or a patch in the roadway. That just irritated me for most of my career. In fact, now I try to avoid that. One thing that I've strived to work with the utilities department to make sure that we don't have that kind of a condition. We're not going to avoid it, but at least we're not going to walk into it knowing that there's something that could occur on the street. The streets were then submitted to the city manager for his review. That was a selection process that, okay, this area isn't something that we want to do. Okay. All right. Or we want to add this area. Once it went through his approval, then it was presented to the city commission for them to review, have a public hearing in regards to the presentation of the streets that are proposed, and then they approved that going forward. And I'll talk about that in the very end. The streets that were to be resurfaced were based on, like I said, the pavement management plan, but also the sanitary sewer system. As we looked at these areas, the city's process of doing the streets is one that we want to do the neighborhoods. We don't want to do certain segments of the roadway, but do the entire neighborhood area rather than disturb the residents 2 or 3 times, 4 times, depending on the area and what needs to be done, is to go in, do all the streets in the neighborhood all at once, disturb them once, and then we don't have to come back and disturb them a second time. And that's been the philosophy of the city's commission, to go ahead and do it as per the neighborhood concept rather than a section here and a section there. We're proposing to, for the plan, to do 7 neighborhoods, 40 streets to be milled and resurfaced, 2 streets that are to be designed and permitted. These are dirt streets that are currently there. They're going to be designed and permitted, and then those will be added to the 2021 plan. It represents about 9.79 centerline miles of roadways. This is the project summary table. This is category 1, which is the maintenance and vulnerability. Read it so small, but what it is it's to restore the pavement, do some maintenance of the pavement, as well as provide for safety, get rid of the potholes. Some of these streets that are listed on here have not been touched, have not had preventive maintenance done on them for decades. Not 1, not 2, but decades, okay? This is the list of streets that are proposed. The last 2 streets that are listed on there are the ones that are currently dirt roads that we're proposing to do design and permitting. And this is an overall map, and you can see that that we're looking at 7 different neighborhoods in seven different areas within the city. We're not concentrating on just one area, but we're going throughout the city and looking at the streets that need to be done at this time. And now I'd look to go ahead and just present real quick through these. This is the first neighborhood. This is and I don't think I need to read off the streets. I'll let you all look at that. It's about $264,000 worth of streets to be milled and resurfaced. And I guess I should talk about the fact that we're doing milling and resurfacing, and the reason is because of the lack of preventive maintenance that has not been done within the area of these, or the streets themselves. They're in from a 0 to a 100, 100 being brand new pavement, 0 being a failure. Most of the streets that are in Plant City are somewhere between 40 and 50, possibly 60, and that's what a lot of these streets are, the lower end of the pavement condition index. And what we'd like to do, what I've presented to the City Commission, is we want to be able to get the streets up to a condition of 70 to 80. Once we go through this process of getting them all up to that point, then we can go into a maintenance program, a preventive maintenance program for these streets. The next area is going to be about $756,000. This is another area, these are small segments, but they're all within the same neighborhood. There are several streets that have already been done recently in the past, so therefore they were not included in this go-round because they were already milled and resurfaced. This is another neighborhood. It's about $151,000. This is another neighborhood, which is about $74,000. This is another neighborhood, which is about $684,000. And then these are the 2 streets on the right are the dirt streets that we wanted to go ahead and go through the process of design and permitting. Right now, they're currently dirt streets. And the commission looked at and was presented the streets for the Transportation Surtax Projects Plan 2020 at their City Commission meeting on September the 23rd, 2019. At that time, they had a public hearing. It was unanimously supported that we go ahead and present this program to the IOC for their review and approval. Just to let you know, I am the engineer that certified the plan, so. And now I'm ready for any questions that you might have.
I think you got one question out the way, but members, we're open for questions if you have any questions for Plant City. Yes, Ms. Sullivan-Moore.
Is this the order in which the projects will be implemented, the way they're listed here?
No, that was just a listing of the different neighborhoods. What we want to do is we want to go in, and even though you'll see that I've overestimated the cost, what happens is that when I get into more details and it actually goes out to bid, it usually comes in lower than that estimate.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So were you able to spend or allocate your full amount for 2020? Is that, or is this a partial
No,
expenditure?
it's
Okay,
full.
It's full.
That's why it's overestimated on the construction cost side, so that I know we're allocated 1.7, a little over 1.7 million. I've come up with $2.4 million worth of streets on a rough construction cost estimate.
Thank you. We appreciate that. All right, members, we are done for the most part. We'll save Hart for next time. Our next meeting is November 21st at 5 o'clock. I bet that meeting's just a couple hours because we're going to take Hart, and then we will vote at that meeting to certify the plans. Yes, Judge?
I got a couple of emails this evening telling me that tonight's meeting was canceled. And the December meeting was canceled. I take it those are incorrect.
You have been hacked, or someone has been hacked, but I got those same emails as well. The 21st meeting is going forward. As I anticipate, that's the only meeting we're going to need to certify, and so that means the optional December 9th meeting I don't anticipate that meeting going
May
forward.
be canceled, but it has not.
Hadn't been canceled yet.
Okay.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
During the break, it was brought to my attention that Senator Joyner got a phone call from someone letting her know that tonight's meeting was canceled, or that Hart's presentation was delayed until the next meeting. For all the communications that you receive, they're going to be coming from a @plancom.org email. Either myself, Cheryl Wilkening, possibly someone else on the Planning Commission staff will contact you. So if you get anything from a Gmail or an unidentified caller, I would treat that as bogus unless we follow up to confirm that. And I was sitting next to Ms. Moore when she canceled the meeting, and she pressed the button to not notify you all. So it's a little bit of a mystery as to why you were notified.
I'm the
person was.
culprit. I don't know how it went to everybody. I put it
We
on
all,
my personal
we all
calendar.
got it. We all got it. So I wasn't going to put you on the record, but staff did. I do want to say thank you to the city for going first, and what you outlined, everybody could follow. So I want to thank you for that. And yes, Senator Joyner.
I since found out that was not to cancel this meeting, that was one before the county commission. And they just said Hillsborough County, and that's where the confusion came in, so Audrey, you're not in this alone.
We got some problems. We'll figure it out. But with that, without objection, meeting is adjourned. Thank you.